The galaxy is quiet. Too quiet. From a distance, Trantor gleams like a jewel of civilization, a city so vast it swallows entire continents, a metropolis whose steel and glass reach beyond the clouds, where millions of lives intertwine in a web of ambition, routine, and silent desperation. And yet, within this glittering perfection, the seeds of collapse have already been sown. How does a civilization that spans 1,000,000 worlds, that commands armies and fleets beyond comprehension, begin to crumble under its own weight? Can the mightiest of empires, so enduring, so absolute, truly fall? History says yes. And in this story, we will see why. Continue watching, whispers a voice that seems to echo through the endless halls of bureaucracy, through the silent corridors of power. Because understanding the fall of one empire might reveal the fate of every empire, including our own. Before we reach the stories of decay, of intrigue, of ambition turned to ash, we must first understand the world at the center. Trantor. Picture a planet entirely consumed by one colossal city. There is no horizon, no fields, no seas untouched. Steel towers rise like mountains, their windows glowing like stars in a permanent twilight. Every surface, every alley, every chamber hums with the rhythm of governance. Officials moving in endless lines, data streaming faster than any human mind can follow, decisions made before the consequences are understood. Trantor is perfection, it is control, and yet beneath the surface it is fragile. Consider the imperial bureaucracy. Tens of thousands of administrators, clerks, scribes, each managing facets of a civilization that cannot be contained in any ledger. Edicts circulate through endless layers of authority, each layer bending the message slightly, reshaping it to personal advantage. This is not chaos, not yet, but it is the first crack in the armor of the galaxy. For when information slows, when ambition eclipses duty, the empire becomes its own enemy. Trantor, the crown jewel of civilization, holds within it the paradox of all human empires, immense power paired with inevitable decay, and yet we are drawn to it. We are mesmerized by the city's brilliance, by the magnitude of human achievement stretched across 12 millennia. Imagine standing atop one of the central spires, looking down on streets that stretch for thousands of kilometers, passing through marketplaces fragrant with alien spices, through endless plazas echoing with the footsteps of millions. Every moment is both breathtaking and terrifying. The empire's heartbeat is everywhere, but so is its impending collapse. History is not kind to such grandeur. Look to Rome, to Byzantium, to the dynasties that ruled half of our own world's past. Each, in its time, held absolute power, yet each fell in ways eerily familiar. Corruption, complacency, overextension, the same patterns repeated, separated by centuries, continents, languages. The First Galactic Empire is no different. It is a mirror reflecting the failures of every human civilization before it, amplified across millions of worlds. And as we peer into this mirror, we must ask, is collapse destiny, or is it something that could have been avoided? This is where Hari Seldon enters the story. A mathematician, a visionary, a man who looked at the chaos of human behavior and saw patterns. Patterns that, when understood, could predict the fate of millions, even billions. Psychohistory, he called it. A science capable of foreseeing the rise and fall of civilizations, not in fragments or conjectures, but in precise mathematical probability. Seldon knew what no ruler dared to acknowledge. The empire, in all its glory, would not endure. And yet, he also knew that within the certainty of collapse lay the possibility of hope. The Seldon plan was born from that hope. It is the hidden cycle, the mechanism designed not to save the empire itself, but to preserve humanity's knowledge, to shorten the darkness that would inevitably follow. Two foundations, placed at opposite ends of the galaxy, tasked with shepherding civilization through the chaos to come. One outward-facing, practical, trading and building. The other hidden, protective, wielding mental powers beyond comprehension. Together, they form a safety net for all of human history. But even the plan is vulnerable because in a galaxy of countless stars and infinite variables, anomalies can and will emerge. And anomalies did emerge. The mule, a single being, unpredicted by Seldon's equations, capable of bending the emotions of others to his will. A disruption in the carefully plotted cycles of destiny, a reminder that no plan, however meticulous, can account for the unpredictable nature of life. Yet it is precisely these disruptions that make the story of the galaxy compelling. Because in the clash between destiny and free will, between order and chaos, the true drama of human or galactic history unfolds. As we journey through this documentary, you will see Trantor not as a distant myth, but as a living, breathing entity. You will smell the oils of machinery, hear the echo of footsteps in endless halls, feel the tension of rulers who know that every decision carries the weight of worlds. You will witness ordinary people caught in extraordinary events, clerks whose simple miscalculation can ripple into galactic consequences, traders who navigate political intrigue as deftly as they navigate asteroid belts, citizens whose daily lives are a microcosm of the empire itself. And through their eyes, you will understand the paradox, an empire so vast, yet so delicately balanced on the choices of millions. So why does this matter? Why should we care about a civilization spanning 1,000,000 worlds in a galaxy far beyond our own? Because the cycle is not confined to space, nor to science fiction. Our world today is not immune. Mega-corporations, sprawling nations, global networks of power, all are subject to the same patterns that doomed Trantor, the same fragility beneath the facade of invincibility. Understanding the rise and fall of empires, then, is not just an exercise in history. It is a lesson in foresight, a warning whispered across the void of time. The question remains, will we recognize the cracks before they widen? Will we understand the forces at work in our own societies? Or will we, too, repeat the cycle? As we begin this exploration, remember that history does not merely tell stories. It issues challenges, and sometimes it issues them in ways we are not ready to hear. The fall of Trantor is not just a tale of bureaucracy and ambition. It is a reflection of all that humanity builds and all that it risks losing. The city hums, the stars await, the plan unfolds. And as we peer into the machinery of fate, one question lingers. Can any empire truly escape the cycle, or are all civilizations doomed to repeat it in patterns as precise as they are cruel? Watch closely. The story is just beginning. The first Galactic Empire was a monument to human ambition, a civilization stretching from the core to the farthest rim of the galaxy. At its heart, Trantor shone like a crown on a king already weary, its steel and glass structures reaching beyond the clouds, consuming every inch of land, every trace of nature. For 12,000 years, it had endured, absorbing planets, bending trade, bending thought, bending history itself. And yet, as with all empires, there were signs that the machinery of greatness could not run forever. Trantor's grandeur was not just in scale, but in its governance. Tens of millions of administrators oversaw thousands of systems, each responsible for the minutiae of planets light years apart. Orders flowed through layers of bureaucracy that had no precedent, no equal in the history of humankind. And yet, with each layer, efficiency slowed, messages distorted, priorities shifted. What should have been a seamless machine became a labyrinth, every corridor a risk, every decision a potential catastrophe. Could an empire so vast maintain cohesion without sacrificing clarity, purpose, or truth? History and psychohistory says no. Consider the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, a civilization that once ruled the known world, expanded beyond imagination, and yet was undone by the very systems that had made it strong: corruption, ambition, bureaucracy, and complacency. Byzantium, the Eastern continuation, endured centuries longer but ultimately fell to pressures it could not anticipate. Trantor mirrored these patterns in extremes. Where Rome had roads, Trantor had interstellar hyperlanes. Where Rome had governors, Trantor had planetary administrators and sector prefects. Where Rome had senators, Trantor had layers upon layers of counselors, each guarding not the people but their own authority. And the empire endured until the weight of its own perfection became a burden it could no longer bear. It is tempting to believe that such an empire could never fall, that the sheer scale of power guarantees stability. Yet this is the paradox at the core of human civilization. Absolute power invites decay. The further from the core, the weaker the control. Outer worlds, those at the edges of communication and supply, became semi-autonomous, governed as much by local custom as by imperial decree. Corruption festered in these regions because the watchful eyes of Trantor could not reach every corner. When decisions were delayed by bureaucracy, when vital resources were misallocated, when authority became abstract rather than practical, the seeds of collapse were sown. Trantor's physical enormity mirrored its administrative complexity. Imagine a planet where every square meter was occupied. Streets, government offices, industrial zones, residential towers, transport networks stacked like layered puzzle pieces. Under the artificial lights, billions of humans and robots moved in an orchestrated chaos, yet this choreography depended on fragile assumptions. Power lines, data conduits, hyperlane communications, all were susceptible to disruption. A single failure, a minor miscalculation could cascade outward, creating consequences felt thousands of light years away. And yet, from the perspective of a citizen in the lower levels of Trantor, the empire seemed eternal. Markets thrived, entertainment dazzled, and order appeared omnipresent. The paradox of perception versus reality is central to the story of every empire. The greater the outward display of power, the deeper the unseen fractures. In this regard, Trantor's beauty was a lie. Its steel towers reflected the sunless skies, hiding the human strain beneath, hiding the exhaustion of workers, clerks, engineers, and soldiers whose lives maintained a perfection the empire could never fully reward or acknowledge. Consider the parallels to modern civilization. Today, we are surrounded by systems we trust: global finance, communication networks, governments that promise stability, and yet cracks appear in familiar ways. Misaligned incentives, over-complex administration, regions disconnected from the center, corruption unaddressed until it becomes catastrophic. Trantor is not merely science fiction, it is a mirror of the patterns we cannot escape. It asks the question every society must face: how does greatness endure when its own scale is its enemy? The fall of Trantor began not with armies or invasions, but with entropy. The slow unraveling of systems built to last forever but maintained by human limitations. Sector by sector, inefficiency crept in, orders miscommunicated, resources mismanaged, security gaps exploited. The core of the empire remained strong, but the periphery began to fray. Traders noted delays in supply shipments. Governors disputed jurisdiction. Military commanders interpreted orders in self-interest rather than duty. The threads of control frayed quietly, invisibly, and yet the consequences were monumental. Even emperors ensconced in palaces of unimaginable luxury could not reverse this decay. They were brilliant, educated, powerful, but they were human. They could issue edicts, reorganize sectors, summon fleets, but they could not bend history itself. And history, guided by the subtle mathematics of mass behavior, was inexorable. Trantor's fate, calculated decades earlier by Hari Seldon and his equations, was not a matter of desire or whim. It was the inevitable consequence of patterns too vast for any one mind to correct. In its heyday, the empire's bureaucracy rivaled the ingenuity of entire civilizations. Trantor's surface was a tapestry of towers, markets, and civic centers, each contributing to the illusion of eternal stability. Yet beneath this veneer, entropy acted like a slow poison, eroding efficiency, eroding loyalty, eroding trust. The more the empire tried to centralize power, the more fragile it became, and the more it attempted to project omnipotence, the more pronounced the cracks. The galaxy watched, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unaware, as the mighty edifice leaned closer to its inevitable collapse. And then came the Seldon crises, moments preordained by psychohistory, flashpoints where the empire could either correct its course or accelerate its decline. Trantor faced the first of these crises quietly at first. Administrators debated regulations, traders argued contracts, local governors challenged imperial authority. No one realized that these small disturbances were not random. They were the first dominoes of a chain reaction that would reshape the galaxy. And as the crisis unfolded, a shadow moved at the edges, unseen but palpable, the anomalies that could disrupt even the most precise predictions. So the question arises again. How does an empire endure when its own magnificence becomes its weakness? How does civilization maintain coherence when the distance between decision and consequence stretches across light years? The answers lie not in brute force or in the charisma of rulers, but in understanding the subtle patterns that govern mass human behavior. And in that understanding, Seldon placed his hope, not in the empire itself, but in the foundations, the silent guardians of knowledge and order. For now, though, Trantor continued to shine. Its citizens moved through their daily lives, unaware of the fragility beneath their feet. Its fleets patrolled the stars, asserting power and projecting security. Its bureaucrats debated endlessly over minutiae, believing that control was eternal. But history never forgets. And as the first cracks appeared, as the edges frayed and the shadows lengthened, the galaxy waited for the inevitable. The empire had reached its apex, and the fall was already written in its architecture, its administration, its very DNA. Trantor would not endure, not because of invaders or rebels, but because the patterns of human civilization are relentless. Growth sows decay, complexity invites error, perfection masks fragility. And in this paradox lies the core lesson of every civilization, that the mightiest empires, no matter how vast, are bound by the same laws that govern every human society. Step into the lower levels of Trantor, where light barely touches steel, and the hum of machinery is constant. The air is thick with oil, dust, and the faint tang of ozone from the energy conduits powering the city above. Endless corridors stretch in every direction, walls lined with conduits, terminals, and blinking interfaces, each carrying information that shapes the lives of billions. Here, humans and machines coexist in a rhythm so precise it borders on ritual. A clerk taps his stylus across a console, feeding data into a system that will determine whether a star system receives supplies, whether a bureaucratic dispute is resolved, or whether a planetary governor is replaced. Every keystroke, every breath, every step is a thread in the web holding civilization together. Yet even in this mechanical perfection, there is tension. The air vibrates with it as if the city itself senses the fragility of its systems. Conveyor tubes hiss. Elevator lifts creak under impossible loads. Somewhere far above, a governor debates strategy in a council chamber, unaware that the miscommunication of a single report could ripple into disaster for 1,000 worlds. The smells, the sounds, the textures of the city are a testament to both ingenuity and vulnerability. Trantor is alive in a way few can understand, but its heartbeat is uneven. Every pulse carries risk. This is where philosophy finds its place. Not in grand speeches, not in imperial decrees, but in the quiet awareness that every complex system teeters on the edge between order and collapse. Trantor is a meditation on impermanence. A civilization that seems eternal is, in reality, a fragile construction of human will. The more we attempt to enforce perfection, the more we reveal our limitations. It is a paradox as old as history itself. The greater the empire, the more it depends on unseen forces, the more it relies on individuals to maintain structures far larger than themselves. And yet, these individuals are not omnipotent. They are human. The visual landscape of Trantor reinforces this lesson. Imagine towers stacked atop towers, streets suspended over other streets, transport tubes weaving through industrial zones, marketplaces, and government complexes. Lights flicker in a rhythm that mimics life itself. One moment steady, the next slightly off, barely perceptible. And in those brief imperfections, entropy whispers. The city is a living canvas of human ambition and limitation, each sector a painting of control and disorder. It is beautiful, terrifying, and instructive all at once. Consider the philosophical implications of such scale. On Trantor, every action carries consequences across light years. Yet paradoxically, no single person can truly comprehend the full scope of the Empire's operations. This tension between individual agency and systemic inevitability is the heartbeat of psychohistory. The mass movements of populations, the rise and fall of planets, the ebb and flow of resources, even the oscillations of politics, these are measurable, predictable, almost mathematical. But anomalies exist. The decisions of one person, the emergence of unforeseen talent or disaster, can bend the course of history. The mule, unknown at this time, will embody this principle. It is a reminder that even in systems designed for predictability, free will persists. The city's sounds reinforce this constant tension. Far below, furnaces roar, pumping energy to higher levels. Wheels and gears grind in industrial factories, producing materials needed to maintain the city and the fleets above. Footsteps echo in the corridors, sometimes hurried, sometimes hesitant. Somewhere in the distance, a train tube releases a hiss of steam as a transport capsule accelerates through kilometers of conduit. The cacophony is a symphony of civilization, but one that masks fragility. Every sound is a note, and every note can trigger a discord if mismanaged. And yet, for all the mechanical precision, there is beauty. Markets filled with exotic goods from thousands of planets, colors so vivid they seem to hum against the dim city lights, smells of alien spices, synthetic perfumes, and rare metals mingling in ways impossible to replicate elsewhere. Traders barter, children laugh in hidden courtyards, and somewhere a scribe copies a fragment of the Encyclopedia Galactica, unaware that his work will become a lifeline for centuries to come. Civilization is fragile, yes, but it is also miraculous, a tension between creation and entropy that defines all human endeavor. The parallels to our modern world are striking. Consider the complexity of global finance, international logistics, or digital infrastructure. Like Trantor, these systems are designed to handle unimaginable scale, yet their fragility is hidden from the average observer. A miscalculated algorithm, a minor disruption in supply chains, a breakdown in communication, these small failures can ripple outward, triggering consequences that affect millions. The lesson is clear. Scale amplifies both power and vulnerability, and it is precisely this amplification that makes civilizations irresistible and dangerous, simultaneously magnificent and precarious. Walking through Trantor's bureaucratic corridors, it becomes clear that collapse is not the result of a single dramatic event, but of countless small deviations amplified across time and space. Misfiled reports, delayed orders, personal ambition overriding duty. Every human choice interacts with every other, like gears in a machine. And while the average citizen never sees the full picture, the effects are unavoidable. History unfolds not as a straight line, but as a network of cause and effect, a web of inevitabilities punctuated by anomalies. Seldon understood this, and it is why he created the plan. He recognized that civilizations are subject to forces beyond their control, forces that will erode perfection, destabilize order, and ultimately drive collapse. Psychohistory predicts these patterns, but it also offers guidance: how to shorten the inevitable darkness, how to preserve knowledge, how to steer humanity toward rebirth. Yet even the plan is vulnerable to anomalies, to the unpredictable elements of human emotion, to the interventions of individuals who act outside statistical expectation. The philosophy of Trantor can be distilled into a single observation. Greatness carries within it the seeds of its own decline. Beauty hides fragility, and perfection hides entropy. Every tower, every hyperlane, every decision is a testament to both human ingenuity and limitation. Civilization is a balancing act, not a state of permanence. And in recognizing this, one understands why history, repeatedly, mirrors itself across continents, millennia, and galaxies. Even as Trantor thrums with life, the shadows lengthen. The lower levels carry whispers of unrest. Minor bureaucratic disputes hint at systemic flaws. Traders note irregularities in supply lines. Governors begin to prioritize self-interest over imperial order. The city remains dazzling, the lights blinding, the machinery flawless in appearance, but the cracks are forming, quietly, inexorably. The Seldon crises loom just over the horizon, invisible yet inevitable. And in this tension between spectacle and fragility, between beauty and entropy, we see the essence of the empire, a civilization capable of astonishing creation, yet inevitably vulnerable to collapse. The question is not whether it will fall, but when. And in asking that question, we find ourselves gazing at our own world, at our own systems, wondering whether we, too, have built something magnificent enough to hide the cracks, yet fragile enough that history waits only for a nudge to bring it down. The lower corridors echo with footsteps. Somewhere, in a room above or below, a clerk misreads a report. Somewhere else, a governor hesitates. Somewhere across the galaxy, a trader reroutes cargo. These are tiny events, seemingly insignificant, but in aggregate, they are the first notes of the symphony of collapse. And the city itself, magnificent, relentless, and impermanent, watches as the first domino falls. In the lower tiers of Trantor, where the artificial sky is perpetually dim, a young clerk named Talric moves with practiced precision. His fingers dance across the data consoles, feeding reports into systems he cannot fully understand. Every entry matters, yet the scale of the city ensures that no one sees the impact of his work or his mistakes. Above him, the corridors of power are alive with debates, decrees, and discussions of planetary security. But here, in the shadowed layers, life is survival, repetition, and quiet anxiety. Talric has never traveled beyond the lower city, yet the fate of millions, of entire star systems, rests indirectly in his hands. One misfiled report could ripple outward, creating chaos that even the highest levels of government would struggle to contain. Far away, in the administrative towers of Sector 142, Governor Lyrian sits behind a desk of polished alloy, staring at a holomap that displays systems over which she holds jurisdiction. Each blinking light represents a world, a population, a culture, a complexity she can barely comprehend, and yet she must act as if she controls it all. Today, a dispute over water rights on a remote agricultural planet demands her attention. She drafts orders, sends envoys, debates the merits of enforcement versus compromise.
Every decision, though seemingly mundane, could alter the course of history in ways invisible to her eyes. The weight of power is both intoxicating and crushing. For all her authority, she is a single human in a web that stretches across 1,000,000 worlds. Meanwhile, in the upper domes where luxury eclipses need, an imperial officer named Draven rehearses speeches, preparing to address the Senate on projected defense budgets. His uniform gleams, his posture is impeccable, but beneath the surface, tension coils like a spring. Rumors circulate of fleet shortages, of outer systems resisting tax levies, of minor uprisings that the core dismisses as inconsequential. Draven knows that these small disruptions, ignored by the elite, could become the sparks that ignite wider rebellion. And yet he continues, polishing words for senators who may never grasp the gravity of the galaxy unraveling around them. The theater of power masks the fragility of reality. On a bustling trade level, merchants haggle over the price of exotic spices and metals. One trader, Yalara, has spent years navigating the labyrinthine regulations of imperial commerce. She knows that a miscalculation in taxes, a delayed shipment, or a miscommunication with a planetary governor can ruin fortunes built over decades. Yet she thrives in this environment, finding opportunity in the gaps left by bureaucracy. Her cunning and adaptability exemplify the rise of individuals who exploit the cracks in the empire to gain power, wealth, and influence, prefiguring the merchant princes who will later dominate the outer worlds. Yalara's story reminds us that even in decay, life persists. Opportunity always exists for those willing to act where the empire hesitates. At the same time, in hidden chambers beneath the administrative hubs, a small group of scribes works tirelessly to copy and preserve knowledge. Each parchment, each fragment of the Encyclopedia Galactica represents a lifeline for the future. These individuals do not command armies or fleets. They do not govern systems or collect taxes. Yet their labor ensures that when the empire collapses, when chaos spreads, civilization can be rebuilt. In their quiet diligence, they embody hope, a fragile yet persistent force, counterbalancing the entropy surrounding them. And unbeknownst to most, their work is already guided by the foresight of Hari Seldon's plan, a silent hand shaping the destiny of the galaxy. As the day progresses, small crises flare across the city. A hyperlane malfunction delays essential shipments to a distant agricultural world. A clerical error misallocates funds for planetary maintenance. Security droids fail to report a minor breach. Each event, minor in isolation, begins to accumulate. The lower city, oblivious to the significance of these failures, hums along. But these micro-disruptions are the first whispers of systemic collapse. Trantor, magnificent and sprawling, begins to show cracks invisible to those who walk its corridors daily. And yet, those cracks are enough to unsettle the balance of the entire empire. Even the citizens feel subtle unease. Markets are vibrant but slightly erratic. Services take longer. Rumors of administrative inefficiency spread. Workers sense the increasing weight of bureaucracy, the endless rules that often contradict themselves. Families feel the strain as energy allocation fluctuates and supply lines falter. It is a tension without a name, a quiet anxiety woven into daily life, one that humans have felt in every civilization before their fall. Trantor is no different. It is a city of shadows, lights, and the persistent, invisible pressure of entropy. Across the galaxy, the first ripples of the Seldon crises appear. Small rebellions, unexpected alliances, the rise of independent powers, all seem unconnected to the ordinary citizens below. Yet the threads of fate are already pulling tight. In the core, imperial analysts argue over trivial points, oblivious to the unseen forces reshaping their world. In the outer sectors, governors act with autonomy, making choices that will reverberate across centuries. And somewhere, far from the public eye, Seldon's predictions quietly unfold, guiding the foundations toward actions that may save humanity from 30 millennia of darkness. The city's vastness makes it easy to miss these threads, to underestimate their impact. Talric, Yalara, Draven, Lyrian,
They are mere actors in a drama too vast for comprehension. And yet, their choices matter. In the infinite web of Trantor, even the smallest misstep can cascade into catastrophe. The human stories, the ambition, fear, cunning, and diligence interweave with the Empire's trajectory, shaping its destiny in ways no algorithm can fully predict. And in this interconnection lies both the beauty and terror of civilization, that the fate of billions can hinge on the actions of a few. But even as these ordinary humans navigate extraordinary circumstances, an anomaly stirs at the edge of the galaxy. A presence, unknown and unanticipated, begins to move through the stars. The mule, still a shadow on the periphery, will test the limits of Seldon's predictions. No clerk, no governor, no merchant, no scribe anticipates his influence. And yet, the first signs of disruption appear. Supply lines misdirected, political alliances shifting unpredictably, whispers of rebellion growing louder. The carefully calculated cycles of the Seldon plan are about to face their first true test. In Trantor's heart, the lower city hums with routine. A clerk misfiles a report. A trader misreads a contract. A governor hesitates in decision. These tiny human moments, invisible to most, converge into a crescendo of consequence. The city, proud and infinite, braces for the first shockwaves of collapse. And in the silent observation of the galaxy, the Seldon crises await, poised to challenge not only the Empire, but the very assumptions of destiny and free will. The Empire has reached its zenith, yet the story is just beginning. Shadows lengthen, whispers grow, and the first dominoes teeter, ready to fall. And as the human stories unfold, the true question emerges: will civilization survive, or will even the most meticulous plan crumble under the weight of unpredictability? The Empire had endured millennia, yet longevity often conceals vulnerability. Where once ambition drove conquest and innovation, complacency had begun to take root. The further from the core, the looser the grip of Trantor's central authority, and the more local rulers acted with independence or with outright disregard for imperial law. Corruption spread quietly, like a slow poison, bureaucrats accepting bribes to overlook irregularities, governors diverting resources for personal gain, military officers inflating reports to preserve reputations. At the heart of Trantor, the emperor's edicts remained theoretically absolute. In practice, they were filtered, diluted, and occasionally ignored entirely. Expansion, once a testament to ingenuity, had become a liability. Entire sectors were governed only loosely, their populations accustomed to self-rule out of necessity. When disputes arose, over taxation, resource allocation, or border enforcement, the central administration often responded with layers of correspondence, each message further delayed by intermediaries who had their own agendas. Entire star systems felt the consequences of a single mismanaged report. As the wheels of bureaucracy ground ever slower, the edges of the empire frayed, creating pockets of instability that were invisible to the citizens of the core. History provides a mirror for these failures. Late Rome faced similar pressures. Provincial governors grew autonomous, armies became politically ambitious, and corruption eroded the very systems designed to maintain stability. Ming China, too, illustrates the peril of bureaucratic expansion. Officials engaged in petty intrigue. Infrastructure decayed, and resource mismanagement weakened imperial control. In every case, the larger the system, the more susceptible it became to human error and greed. Trantor exemplified this principle on a galactic scale, compressing these lessons into an environment more extreme than any terrestrial civilization could achieve. The cracks in the empire were subtle but cumulative. An outer rim governor might redirect supplies to secure local favor, leaving an adjacent system undersupplied. A regional bureaucrat might prioritize personal gain over planetary welfare, stifling productivity. In isolated sectors, a single rebellion or failed harvest could cascade into a minor crisis, and the ripple effects traveled inward. touching multiple worlds before the core administration could respond. The result was a galaxy in which localized failures began to resemble systemic risk, where small human actions amplified over time to threaten the cohesion of the empire itself. And yet, the empire appeared resilient. Its fleets patrolled the hyperlanes, its armies were unmatched, and its cities displayed wealth and technological mastery beyond imagination. To the untrained eye, the empire seemed eternal. The paradox is central to the human experience. The larger the success, the more invisible the vulnerabilities. Magnificent displays of power mask the decay beneath. Every parade, every ceremonial address, every imperial celebration is both testament and distraction, a stage set to obscure the entropy creeping in the shadows. Even the emperor, ensconced in Trantor's central spires, could not perceive the full scope of danger. Counselors presented analyses, reports quantified risk, but the data itself was tainted by human manipulation. And as each day passed, the moral decay of governance intensified. Military officers schemed, legislators compromised, and merchants leveraged both to gain advantage. The balance of power, carefully maintained for centuries, was tipping, and while the core remained oblivious, the periphery, the outer sectors and remote colonies, grew restless, increasingly autonomous, increasingly dangerous. The rise of local autonomy created its own paradox. Necessity bred innovation. Planets forced to act without direct oversight developed economic networks, technological solutions, and political alliances that strengthened their resilience. Traders adapted routes. Governors established autonomous bureaucracies, and cultural identity flourished independently. Yet these very strengths undermined imperial unity, producing pockets of society capable of survival outside the empire's control. And as these pockets multiplied, so too did the tension between central authority and local freedom. Meanwhile, corruption fed complacency at all levels. Officials diverted funds to bolster private interests. Oversight committees became ceremonial, and inspection protocols were routinely bypassed. In every layer of governance, the mechanisms designed to maintain integrity were systematically undermined. What had once been the backbone of administration became the source of instability. The empire's vastness, which had once been its strength, now accelerated decay. Errors compounded across interstellar distances. Mismanagement spread through hyperlane networks, and the illusion of order persisted even as systems eroded beneath it. At the same time, external pressures mounted. Neighboring sectors experienced environmental shifts, resource scarcity, and civil unrest. While the core maintained an appearance of omnipotence, these problems were increasingly beyond its ability to resolve swiftly. Governors diverted attention to immediate crises, often ignoring imperial directives for the sake of expediency. Traders exploited loopholes, redistributing goods where they could maximize profit. Engineers improvised solutions to failing infrastructure. These interventions preserved life and commerce in the short term, but destabilized the central system, creating a galaxy increasingly difficult to manage. The empire's internal rot was mirrored in its military. Fleets once disciplined and cohesive began to fracture along lines of loyalty, favor, and influence. Admirals sought personal glory. Generals plotted for regional dominance, and soldiers carried out orders that sometimes contradicted imperial intent. In any sector, a misjudgment in command could trigger conflict, and small disputes could escalate into civil strife before Trantor could respond. The machinery of the empire, so vast and powerful, was exposed to the same vulnerabilities that had undone empires of old. Amidst this turbulence, psychohistory remained the galaxy's invisible stabilizer. Hari Seldon's plan anticipated the patterns of decay, the emergence of corruption, the risks of complacency. But psychohistory could not intervene directly. It could only predict outcomes and offer guidance through the foundations. The first foundation in the outer rim and the second foundation hidden at Star's End were humanity's insurance policy. Their success depended on acting in alignment with predicted crises, correcting deviations, guiding human behavior, and preventing small failures from cascading into systemic collapse. And yet, anomalies would appear. Individuals and events that defied statistical prediction introduced instability. The first hints of such disruption were subtle: a minor rebellion, an unanticipated alliance, a sudden natural disaster. These events did not fit neatly into the plan, and their consequences rippled unpredictably. The Empire's leaders, blinded by hubris and accustomed to control, failed to perceive the threat until it had begun to grow. They were part of a system whose fragility was already outpacing their ability to manage it. By this point, the question becomes unavoidable. Can even the most meticulously governed civilization survive when human nature, ambition, greed, oversight, error, interacts with complexity at scale? Trantor's brilliance and decay offer a cautionary tale, not just for a fictional galaxy, but for any civilization that reaches beyond its immediate grasp. Its fate is a lesson in the limits of power, the inevitability of entropy, and the importance of foresight. And the story is far from over. The first cracks are widening, and the Seldon crises, though invisible to most, are approaching like storm clouds on the horizon. The corridors of Trantor's administrative spires buzz with activity, but the energy feels different now, tense, taut, and fraying at the edges. The hum of machinery is louder in some sectors, quieter in others. Lights flicker as power surges are diverted to more critical zones. The air carries the metallic scent of overheated conduits, mingled with the faint odor of oil, burnt paper, and recycled water. Somewhere beneath the city, forgotten maintenance tunnels echo with the clanging of tools as overworked technicians rush to repair minor failures before they become catastrophes. It is a city alive, yet its pulse falters with every passing day. In the upper towers, the opulence of the imperial elite contrasts sharply with the struggles below. Marble floors gleam under artificial lighting. Holographic displays shimmer, and orchestras of automated servants maintain flawless appearances. Yet even here, subtle signs of decay are evident. Reports arrive late. Messages from remote sectors are contradictory. Advisors whisper about minor rebellions on fringe worlds. The opulence masks anxiety, a fragile veneer over a foundation slowly eroding under its own complexity. The human senses can detect it if one pays attention. A slight hesitation in conversation, a pause in the response of a clerk, a guarded glance from a junior officer. The smell of tension is everywhere. Markets in the mid-levels are crowded, but traders' movements are sharper, almost defensive. The clatter of coins mingles with the hiss of steam from transport tubes, and the chatter of patrons carries an undercurrent of anxiety. A delivery bot malfunctions in the alleyways, spilling crates of exotic fruit into the metallic grime. Children pause mid-play, staring at the cascading goods, their curiosity tinged with the instinctive unease that comes from living in a city whose machinery of control is both omnipresent and imperfect. The human element, curiosity, impatience, error, is as much a force of entropy as failing infrastructure. Sensory overload is constant. Transport tubes hum as capsules accelerate through kilometers of conduit, lights streaking past like stars in motion. Factory floors clang and hiss, mixing with the buzz of data terminals and the distant roar of air recyclers. Water towers release intermittent sprays to maintain environmental balance, adding moisture to an atmosphere already dense with chemical and organic particulates. For the untrained observer, Trantor's complexity is breathtaking. For those attuned to patterns, it is ominous. Every sound, every vibration, every smell is a reminder that life here is dependent on an intricate balance, one misstep away from cascading failure. Philosophically, Trantor becomes a meditation on the fragility of order, How can an entire civilization, spread across millions of worlds and millennia, maintain stability when every element, every human, machine, and system introduces variables beyond complete control? Entropy is not an abstract concept here. It is a tactile presence. The beauty of the city, the lights, the technology, the human ingenuity, masks its fundamental impermanence. Trantor teaches that all systems, no matter how complex, are governed by the same truths that apply to every society. Growth sows fragility, scale magnifies error, and apparent stability conceals vulnerability. Consider a modern parallel. Today, we rely on networks, financial, digital, logistical, that connect billions of people across continents. We marvel at their speed, their capacity, their resilience. Yet we see cracks, cyber attacks that disrupt entire sectors, supply chain delays that ripple globally, governance failures that magnify inequality. Like Trantor, our systems are magnificent, yet they carry the seeds of disruption in every corner. And like the Empire, the consequences of failure are rarely contained. Small anomalies, human error, technical glitches, political miscalculation can cascade into crises that overwhelm the apparent strength of institutions. The senses also reveal the human cost. In lower-level residential domes, the recycled air carries hints of fatigue, anxiety, and desperation. Residents navigate crowded corridors, their footsteps echoing against metallic walls. Children play with makeshift toys crafted from salvaged materials, their laughter a fragile defiance against the oppressive hum of bureaucracy. Food distributions arrive inconsistently, and the smells of cooking fluctuate depending on sector efficiency. Each day is a careful negotiation with imperfection, a dance of human adaptability against the unforgiving demands of infrastructure and regulation. In the bureaucratic halls, clerks shuffle papers with a mechanical rhythm, yet their eyes betray subtle stress. A single misfiled report could disrupt the supply of medicines to a distant colony. A delayed tax assessment could trigger rebellion on a planet halfway across the galaxy. Human decisions, made in isolation, interlock across trillions of calculated probabilities, creating a delicate lattice. And when even one strand fails, the consequences amplify through the lattice like a silent shockwave. The city, in its mechanical grandeur, responds obediently, but only as long as its human operators do not falter. Trantor's military also contributes to the sensory tapestry. Fleet docks are a symphony of activity. Engines roar, crews shout, loading bays clang. Yet the sounds are uneven, a subtle hint of miscoordination. Supplies arrive late, instructions are misunderstood, and command chains overlap with conflicting orders. The mightiest military organization in the galaxy operates with precision on paper, but the human and mechanical elements introduce a chaos that grows with every kilometer from the core. Auditory cues, delayed sirens, misfiring engines, overlapping alarms are warnings that those attuned to the city's pulse can detect. The philosophy embedded in this chaos is profound. Trantor embodies the tension between order and entropy, between human ambition and limitation. Civilization's survival does not depend solely on structures, armies, or technology. It depends on humans acting within systems that magnify both competence and error. The grandest achievements can mask the simplest vulnerabilities. The most meticulous plans can be undone by the smallest missteps. And even foresight, as in Seldon's psychohistory, must contend with anomalies that cannot be predicted. Trantor also demonstrates the intimate relationship between perception and reality. To those living within its bounds, the Empire appears immutable, flawless, and eternal. Yet to the observer attuned to patterns, the reality is starkly different. The hum of machinery, the flicker of lights, the subtle smells in the air, and the minor errors in human judgment all signal the emergence of instability. Magnitude is deceptive. Grandeur is not resilience. And the senses, when trained to perceive the invisible, reveal truths that elude even the most powerful rulers. The city teems with human life, yet every sensory detail reflects potential failure. The clang of industry, the hiss of transport tubes, the muffled voices in corridors, the flickering lights, they all speak of a civilization straining under its own complexity. The philosophical lesson is clear. No matter how advanced, no matter how powerful, every system is vulnerable when built on human imperfection and interdependent complexity. Civilization is a dance with chaos, and Trantor, magnificent though it is, walks this dance daily. And yet, amidst the textures, sounds, and smells of decay, the galaxy's future waits in quiet preparation. The Seldon plan anticipates these crises. The foundations will act, and hope persists despite entropy. But anomalies remain, poised to challenge even the most precise predictions. The city hums, alive with light and shadow, every pulse a reminder that collapse is not a distant threat, it is imminent. Every sense, sight, sound, touch, smell, testifies to the fragility underlying the splendor. The question remains, will the human operators of this magnificent, sprawling machine detect the warning signs, or will they be swept aside by the subtle accumulation of errors and corruption? The Empire stands, proud yet vulnerable, on the cusp of crises that will redefine its fate. And in the hush of the lower corridors, in the flicker of distant lights, in the hiss of transport tubes, the first whispers of collapse stir. In a dimly lit office deep within the industrial spires, a bureaucrat named Raylan leans over a stack of reports, his eyes straining against the glow of flickering holo displays. He is mid-level in the imperial hierarchy, responsible for overseeing resource allocations to half a dozen outer rim colonies. Each report represents worlds light years apart, populations in need, systems barely surviving. Rollin has learned to prioritize, to ignore minor anomalies to focus on crises he can control. Yet even his best judgment cannot compensate for the failures cascading through layers of administration above and below him. A single misjudgment, misreading a shipment schedule, approving flawed requisitions, can destabilize an entire sector. Meanwhile, in a distant agricultural planet at the edge of the Empire, a farmer named Erin struggles with the consequences of delayed deliveries. Fertilizers arrive late, machinery fails without spare parts, and the workforce is stretched thin. The Empire's oversight promises security, but its bureaucracy has created fragility. Erin's choices, how to allocate limited resources, how to respond to shifting climate patterns, carry consequences not just for his farm, but for neighboring colonies reliant on his crops. Civilization, he realizes, is not a monolithic construct. It is a fragile lattice woven from countless human decisions, each vulnerable to error, greed, or neglect. Back on Trantor, a trader named Veril navigates the mid-level markets with practiced caution. His livelihood depends on exploiting gaps left by bureaucratic inefficiency. A shipment meant for a core city has been misrouted. Veril reroutes it to maximize profit, bribes a clerk, and secures rare goods for his patrons.
He thrives because the system fails, because corruption, complacency, and local autonomy create opportunities others cannot see. Yet Veril is keenly aware that each small exploit contributes to systemic instability. He is a beneficiary of decay, yet also an unwitting agent accelerating it. The military, too, is caught in this web. Admiral Pylon inspects docking bays, counting crew and cargo, but the numbers rarely match the reports from Sector Command. Ships are undermanned, critical supplies are misallocated, and minor insubordination is increasingly common. Pollen's attempts to maintain order are heroic but insufficient. The Empire's scale renders every effort partial, every correction temporary. A single overlooked failure could cascade into disaster in the outer sectors, triggering rebellion or famine. The human cost is measured not only in lost efficiency but in lives. Elsewhere, A junior clerk named Tira experiences the microcosm of decay firsthand. Tasked with coordinating interstellar permits for agricultural exports, she discovers discrepancies she cannot explain. Shipments disappearing, approvals reversed, conflicting orders arriving from separate governors. Her attempts to rectify these issues are delayed by layers of bureaucracy, each level claiming to await confirmation from above. The city seems indifferent to her struggles, and yet these minor failures, multiplied across thousands of clerks like her, threaten the empire's stability. Tira's frustration mirrors the invisible tension pulsing through every level of Trantor. In quieter corridors, scribes and archivists work tirelessly to preserve knowledge even as chaos spreads. One, named Corin, notices that records from distant sectors are incomplete or tampered with. The anomalies are small but persistent. He understands that maintaining accurate documentation is a lifeline for future generations, and that failing to preserve knowledge accelerates collapse. His work is solitary, unheralded, and yet vital. In a civilization this vast, a single scribe can influence the trajectory of millions by protecting what cannot be measured in real time: memory, history, and accumulated understanding. Despite the scale, the human stories converge in moments of acute consequence. On a peripheral world, an unanticipated harvest failure coincides with a misallocated shipment of supplies. Citizens panic, local authorities struggle to maintain order, and the news filters slowly toward Trantor. By the time it reaches Raylan's desk, the crisis is already spreading. Decisions are made under pressure, often rushed and incomplete, further amplifying the error. A cascade begins, minor, human, inevitable. The Seldon crises are approaching, invisible yet unavoidable. Each human action, from the clerk misfiling a report to the governor diverting resources, is a domino in a chain stretching across the galaxy. And as anomalies emerge, the Empire's response becomes increasingly reactive, less calculated, less able to anticipate outcomes. Humanity, for all its ingenuity, struggles against the inertia of a system built on complexity and fragility. Amid the turmoil, an unknown force begins to stir in the distant rim, a subtle anomaly, not yet named, not yet recognized, moving quietly through the shadows. The mule, a presence outside prediction, begins to manifest influence through emotion, persuasion, and disruption. His existence is undetectable by Trantor's sensors, invisible to bureaucratic hierarchies, and incomprehensible to the statisticians who maintain the illusion of control. The first subtle shifts ripple through trade networks, political alliances, and military assignments, hints of chaos that few notice. Back on Trantor, Raylan finally realizes that the misfiled reports, delayed approvals, and missing shipments are not isolated errors. They are patterns. And patterns, once recognizable, cannot be ignored. He attempts to alert higher authorities, but the corridors of power are already clogged with their own minor crises. Orders conflict, messages contradict, and every solution seems to exacerbate another problem. The human machinery, strained and imperfect, begins to falter. At the same time, Varel notices irregularities in trade routes that cannot be explained by human error alone. He tracks the shipments, puzzled by the sudden inefficiencies in the outer rim. Each misstep points toward an unseen hand. Across the galaxy, similar anomalies appear, small but concentrated, hinting at a presence that could alter the course of events. These signs are subtle, yet undeniable. The galaxy itself seems to shiver at the edges of awareness, aware that the first true disruptions of the Seldon plan are arriving. And then a single report reaches the Emperor's desk. An entire planetary system has declared autonomy, ignoring imperial decrees entirely. Supplies have been rerouted, fleets reassigned, and communications cut. It is unprecedented. A ripple that should have been contained has begun to expand,
The administrators scrambling to respond are already late. The consequences will not be immediate, but will ripple outward in months, years, decades. Trantor, magnificent, sprawling, eternal in its appearance, trembles for the first time in millennia. Human error, ambition, corruption, and unforeseen anomalies converge in a perfect storm. The empire teeters, unaware of how precariously it balances. Every story, Talric, Raylan, Varel, Erin, Tira, Corin, intersects in this moment. Their actions part of an invisible web guiding the galaxy toward its first Seldon crisis. And somewhere, far from the core, the shadow of the mule grows. The anomaly that defies prediction, the disruption beyond calculation, begins to assert influence, and the galaxy waits for the first signs of its power to become undeniable. The Empire, confident in its bureaucracy, its fleets, and its laws, is blind. The first domino has begun to fall. The outer rim of the galaxy had long been considered peripheral, a distant frontier of the first Galactic Empire where the Emperor's reach was felt only in theory. Planets that once relied on imperial oversight now carved their own paths, guided by necessity, opportunity, and ambition. Among these worlds, Terminus emerged, not as a military stronghold, nor as a center of political intrigue, but as a sanctuary for knowledge. The first foundation, conceived by Hari Seldon as part of his grand plan, was designed to concentrate the collective wisdom of humanity in one place, to act as a seed from which civilization could regrow when the darkness of collapse inevitably descended. Terminus was unremarkable in appearance, a small planet at the edge of the galaxy, far from the grandeur of Trantor, yet its significance was immeasurable. Here, the first encyclopedists began their work, copying, cataloging, and interpreting centuries of human history, science, and culture. Every decision, every record, every calculation mattered. The survival of knowledge itself became the foundation of future power. In a civilization crumbling under its own weight, the first foundation represented precision, foresight, and purpose, a beacon against the entropy that threatened to engulf the galaxy. Yet power in the outer rim would not come solely from intellect. Trade, diplomacy, and economic acumen would shape the trajectory of the Foundation in ways Seldon could anticipate but not micromanage. Merchants traveled vast distances navigating the labyrinthine hyperlanes, forging alliances and seizing opportunities left by the faltering empire. Their ships carried more than goods. They carried influence, culture, and the subtle expansion of a power that began with knowledge but would grow through commerce. The marriage of intellect and pragmatism created a new kind of civilization, one attuned to the laws of human behavior that Seldon's psychohistory had predicted. Conflict was inevitable, even here on the periphery. Neighboring systems, wary of an emerging center of influence, tested the Foundation's resolve. Initial skirmishes were minor, easily contained by careful diplomacy and shrewd economic leverage, yet they provided early lessons. Raw knowledge is power only when paired with practical application. The encyclopedists realized that surviving the coming centuries required more than books. It demanded strategy, foresight, and a capacity to adapt to challenges unforeseen. It was the beginning of a cycle, knowledge preserved, influence exerted, and power accumulated subtly, incrementally, until the Foundation became more than its humble origins. The rise of the Foundation also reflected the collapse occurring elsewhere. Trantor's bureaucracies continued to fracture under the weight of corruption, complacency, and human error. Communication delays, misallocated resources, and local autonomy undermined imperial authority, leaving gaps into which the Foundation's influence could grow. While the core remained blind to the outer rim's emergence, the seeds planted on Terminus quietly flourished. It was a demonstration of Seldon's vision. By positioning knowledge at the galaxy's edge, he created a center of influence resilient enough to survive when the core faltered. In these formative years, the Foundation's leaders faced moral and strategic dilemmas. How much intervention was ethical when civilizations around them were failing? Should they impose order or allow independent worlds to navigate chaos at their own pace? The answers lay not in brute force, but in careful observation of human behavior, in application of psychohistorical principles, and in subtle guidance that shaped societies without overt control. Knowledge became not only a shield against collapse, but a tool to direct the future. Meanwhile, trade networks expanded, connecting isolated colonies and planets previously neglected by the Empire. Merchants became conduits of power, transporting goods, ideas, and influence across light years. Their success relied on trust, negotiation, and adaptability, a sharp contrast to the rigid hierarchy of Trantor's administration. The rise of merchant power in the Outer Rim illustrates a key principle of Seldon's plan. Human ingenuity will fill gaps left by failing structures, creating new centers of influence that eventually shape the course of history. The First Foundation's power grew incrementally, often unnoticed by those in the core. Its strategy was subtle: solve local crises efficiently, establish trade dominance, and use knowledge as leverage. Planets that welcomed the Foundation's expertise flourished. Those that resisted gradually found themselves marginalized. It was not coercion, but strategy guided by insight into human behavior, the core of psychohistory applied in practice. The Outer Rim became a laboratory in governance, economics, and diplomacy, producing leaders and systems capable of thriving when the Empire faltered. Even as the Foundation's influence expanded, challenges persisted. Resource scarcity, political friction, and cultural differences created constant tension. Leaders were forced to innovate, finding ways to reconcile conflicting interests while maintaining the larger objective of preserving civilization. It was a delicate balance. Intervene too aggressively, and colonies would rebel; act too passively, and entropy would erode influence. The emerging society learned that power in a complex, fragile civilization is not maintained through force alone, but through foresight, adaptability, and careful manipulation of knowledge and trade. The philosophical stakes were equally high. The Foundation's rise illustrates the interplay between destiny and agency. Seldon's psychohistory could predict broad patterns, but individual decisions, clever negotiations, calculated risks, acts of daring, determined how events unfolded in real time. Knowledge was both shield and compass, yet human unpredictability ensured that even the most meticulously designed plans required adaptation. This tension between prediction and anomaly mirrors the larger narrative of civilization itself. Patterns exist, but anomalies test the limits of foresight. History itself becomes a teacher. Comparing the Foundation's strategies with terrestrial precedents, one finds echoes in the rise of mercantile powers such as Venice, the Dutch Republic, or the Hanseatic League. Knowledge, trade, and adaptability created enduring influence where brute force alone failed. The Foundation replicates this dynamic on a galactic scale. Intellect guides action, commerce secures stability, and the cumulative effect reshapes the trajectory of entire regions. The lesson is clear: empires crumble, but structures built on understanding human behavior, adaptability, and foresight endure. As the first centuries unfold, the Foundation achieves milestones that once seemed improbable. Planets dependent on Trantor's decrees now thrive under their own local governance, guided subtly by the insights of encyclopedists. Trade routes become arteries of influence, connecting disparate worlds into a network loyal to knowledge rather than brute authority. And yet, the galaxy remains imperfect. The Outer Rim is a laboratory, not a utopia, and the Foundation's success depends on constant vigilance, innovation, and attention to the human element. Even a small failure, a miscalculation in trade, a diplomatic faux pas, a minor rebellion, could undermine decades of progress, and then, in the periphery, the first signs of anomaly begin to appear. Subtle deviations in human behavior, small disruptions in trade, unexpected alliances, and hints of unpredicted conflict foreshadow challenges that Seldon's psychohistory did not fully anticipate. These anomalies, though minor now, will grow, testing the resilience of the foundation and the very assumptions on which it is built. The seeds of chaos, already visible in Trantor, now emerge at the edges of the galaxy where knowledge and trade intersect. The rise of the first foundation is both exhilarating and precarious. Its early victories mask underlying tension. Its successes rely on the human capacity for cleverness, adaptability, and subtle influence. Yet as the shadows lengthen across the outer rim, the galaxy waits for the moment when these minor anomalies converge into crises, events that will test the very limits of psychohistory and the vision of Hari Seldon. The air on Terminus carries a crispness unfamiliar to most inhabitants of the core worlds. The planet is small, its atmosphere thin yet breathable, with gentle breezes stirring the sparse vegetation that lines the city's edges. In the early mornings, a pale sun glints off the polished surfaces of the academy, illuminating the dust motes that swirl lazily in the air. The scent of ozone from experimental laboratories mingles with the earthy aroma of cultivated fields, a reminder that knowledge and survival coexist here, inseparable and intertwined. Every sense is engaged in a careful balance of progress and preservation. Within the academy, the hum of activity is constant but measured. Scholars move with deliberate precision, their footsteps muffled against polished floors. Holographic displays float in the air, projecting star charts, chemical formulas, and planetary topographies. The faint whir of data processors mixes with the scratching of quills on paper as human hands still preserve knowledge in tangible form, a tactile connection to a past that might otherwise vanish. Every sound, every movement, communicates the rhythm of civilization in miniature, a microcosm of order rising from the fringes of chaos. The streets of Terminus resonate with human endeavor. Markets bustle with traders, haggling over rare components, star charts, and analytical instruments. The clang of metal as goods are offloaded from transport craft echoes across corridors. Steam from industrial engines hisses into the air, mingling with the soft murmur of conversation and the occasional barked order from supervisors coordinating shipments. Here, the senses are overwhelmed not by oppression, but by the energy of life directed with purpose. The human element, curiosity, negotiation, ingenuity, is tangible, a force shaping the city's destiny as surely as any algorithm. Philosophically, Terminus represents a meditation on the interplay of knowledge, power, and human agency. Knowledge alone is inert, its potential is realized only when applied with intention. The encyclopedists labor not merely to preserve information, but to create frameworks capable of guiding human behavior across centuries. Every measurement, every observation, every record is a thread in the delicate web of civilization, woven to withstand the chaos predicted by psychohistory. Here, intellect becomes a tool for survival, a shield against the entropy that swirls beyond the city's protective boundaries. Consider a modern parallel. In our world today, think of institutions like universities, think tanks, or research hubs, centers where knowledge is concentrated and preserved, where ideas can shape policy, commerce, and culture across vast populations. These centers operate on both a practical and philosophical plane. They anticipate challenges, influence decision-making, and sometimes prevent crises that might otherwise escalate. Terminus is humanity's ultimate iteration of this principle. Knowledge as power, applied not with immediacy or force, but with foresight spanning millennia. Sensory immersion extends even into the Foundation's industrial and logistical sectors, Cargo bays hum with the mechanical rhythm of automated loaders. The scent of heated metals mingles with lubricants and recycled air. Workers navigate walkways suspended over deep storage chambers, their footsteps echoing against steel walls. In laboratories, chemical experiments hiss, bubble, and occasionally spark, filling the air with acrid scents of reaction. Observation decks provide the soft whine of telescopes scanning the stars, detecting faint anomalies in trade routes or neighboring systems. Every element, the tactile, the auditory, the olfactory, reinforces the sense that life here is a careful orchestration of human effort and mechanical precision. Even the cultural life of Terminus is imbued with sensory richness. Music from local performers drifts through plazas, carrying tones both soothing and stimulating. Public debates echo in auditoriums where the smell of parchment and ink is mingled with the faint tang of recycled air. The vibrancy of these experiences signals a civilization asserting itself, one that seeks not only survival, but the refinement of human expression. Here, culture and intellect are inseparable. Both are tools to maintain cohesion and purpose in an otherwise unpredictable galaxy. The philosophical stakes are heightened by awareness of the outer rim's vulnerability. Knowledge, while potent, cannot enforce itself. Trade, while lucrative, cannot secure loyalty. Every achievement requires constant vigilance, innovation, and attention to human psychology. Leaders of Terminus must act not merely as administrators, but as stewards of civilization, anticipating the ripple effects of decisions across time and space. The city becomes a laboratory, a stage for observing human behavior under conditions of scarcity, risk, and potential upheaval. The tension between prediction and uncertainty permeates every sensory layer. A miscalculated shipment might disrupt a planetary economy. A misunderstood scientific principle could hinder technological advancement. An overlooked social tension could escalate into rebellion. Even as the city hums with coordinated activity, subtle signs of anomaly emerge. Traders whisper about missing shipments. Scribes notice discrepancies in archival data. Scouts report unusual celestial phenomena. The senses detect the faint tremors of a future crisis, a warning that the careful edifice of knowledge and trade remains vulnerable. Terminus also embodies the paradox of influence and invisibility. Its impact on the galaxy is immense, yet its operations are largely hidden from the core. The city's laboratories, markets, and auditoriums pulse with life. Yet to the broader empire, it is but a dot at the edge of a vast, uncharted frontier. The contrast is deliberate. The foundation's strength lies in subtlety, in influencing the galaxy through intellect and commerce rather than overt force. Power here is a quiet, precise phenomenon, manifesting in ways that sensory engagement, sight, sound, touch, smell, reveals to those who inhabit the city intimately. And yet, the universe beyond Terminus hums with unseen forces. Small anomalies appear on trade routes, deviations from predicted patterns in planetary behavior, and irregularities in resource distribution. These disruptions are subtle, often unnoticed by the majority, but they hint at the first signs of challenges that psychohistory cannot fully anticipate. The senses of observant citizens and analysts catch glimpses, an unusual tension in a market, a slight hesitation in a delivery protocol, a fleeting irregularity in communications. Philosophically, this demonstrates the perpetual tension between order and chaos. Knowledge, no matter how meticulously preserved and applied, exists within a dynamic system influenced by countless unpredictable human actions. Terminus teaches that survival requires more than intellect or diligence. It requires constant observation, adaptation, and the humility to acknowledge what cannot be controlled. Civilization is both fragile and resilient, shaped by foresight but tested by anomaly. The city, alive with sight, sound, and movement, stands as a testament to these principles. Its streets, laboratories, and markets are not merely functional, they are living reminders of what humanity can achieve when intellect is applied with foresight. Yet every sensory detail, the hiss of machinery, the echo of footsteps, the scent of chemicals in earth, the flicker of lights, carries a warning. Anomalies are present, subtle but growing. The future of the outer rim, and perhaps the galaxy itself, depends on the ability of Terminus to respond, adapt, and persist. And in the distance, faint signals arrive from beyond the known sectors. Anomalies that defy expectation, subtle shifts in behavior that hint at forces the Foundation has yet to anticipate. The human senses, trained by centuries of careful observation, detect the tremors of an emerging crisis. The city pulses with life and purpose, yet a quiet tension threads through every corridor, every plaza, every lab. The first challenge to the Foundation's rising power is already stirring, imperceptible to most, but undeniable to those who pay attention. In the first weeks of the Foundation, a young scholar named Jorvin spends long hours in the archives, meticulously copying texts from ancient civilizations. His hands are stained with ink, his eyes sore from reading microscopic scripts, and yet he works tirelessly, knowing that every page preserved is a lifeline for a galaxy on the edge of collapse. Jorvin is acutely aware that his labor is invisible to most, that the core would never notice or care, yet he feels a profound sense of purpose. Each recorded insight is a small act of defiance against entropy, a statement that knowledge will outlast chaos. Meanwhile, a trader named Solara navigates the bustling markets of Terminus, moving goods across newly established hyperlanes. Her sharp mind discerns opportunities in inefficiencies, a delayed shipment, a resource surplus, or a neighbor planet in need. Solara does not wield weapons or armies, but her influence is no less powerful. Through commerce, she shapes alliances, fosters trust, and subtly expands the Foundation's reach. Each transaction carries risk. Missteps could anger a powerful planetary governor or disrupt an emerging trade network. But she thrives precisely because she understands human behavior, supply, and demand better than anyone else. In the Academy's laboratories, Talus experiments with chemical compounds and mechanical devices that could revolutionize energy production on remote colonies. The experiments are delicate, sometimes dangerous, yet every success promises a tangible improvement in life for thousands of people. Talus feels the weight of responsibility acutely. Failure could slow the progress of an entire system, while innovation could create a ripple of prosperity that echoes for light years. His work embodies the delicate interplay between intellect, human agency, and the structural leverage of the Foundation, a reminder that civilization rises not through brute power, but through cumulative, deliberate effort. Even in the political sphere, young administrators face trials. A clerk named Rena must negotiate a dispute between two neighboring planets, both reliant on Foundation-managed resources. Each word she speaks carries weight. Each decision she makes has consequences that ripple across sectors. The core remains unaware of these interactions, blind to the slow but deliberate accumulation of influence. Rena feels the gravity of responsibility keenly, understanding that these seemingly minor conflicts are the training ground for leadership that will eventually govern the outer rim. At the same time, subtle anomalies begin to manifest. On a trading route connecting Terminus to a frontier colony, a fleet of merchant ships reports unexplained delays and miscommunications. Supplies vanish en route, deliveries arrive at unexpected locations, and minor rebellions flare in peripheral systems. The disruptions are minor at first, seemingly random, but patterns begin to emerge. Traders whisper among themselves, scholars note discrepancies in records, and administrators start to sense that something is not as it should be. The Foundation, which has so far acted with precise foresight, is confronted with uncertainty. Jorvan, Solaris, and Talus, representatives of intellect, commerce, and innovation, begin to notice the first subtle signs of disruption. A minor rebellion on a distant planet defies prediction. A shipment of rare metals disappears inexplicably. An alliance between colonies shifts without warning. Each anomaly is small, almost imperceptible, yet cumulatively they form a pattern that threatens to undermine the Foundation's influence. The human element, with its unpredictability, introduces a variable even Seldon's psychohistory cannot fully anticipate. In one moment of stark realization, Solara observes that a neighboring system previously aligned with the Foundation begins diverting trade to a competing entity. She attempts to intervene through negotiation, offering resources and incentives, but the system resists. Her carefully planned strategies falter, revealing that even the most meticulous application of knowledge and commerce is vulnerable to anomaly. The sensation is terrifying. The Foundation's influence, which had seemed absolute in its local sphere, is not immune to disruption. Meanwhile, Talus confronts a laboratory malfunction. A delicate experiment that had been essential for energy production in outer rim colonies begins to fail. The failure is minor but symbolic. Even the infrastructure built on intellect and foresight can falter. Every element of the Foundation, knowledge, trade, technology, is interdependent. One flaw, one anomaly, can propagate through systems, threatening stability in ways that are difficult to contain. Human vigilance is necessary, but not sufficient. Unpredictable variables exist that require adaptation, improvisation, and sometimes sheer luck. Rena faces her own crisis. One colony, dependent on Foundation-managed agriculture, suffers crop failure due to environmental anomalies. Attempts to coordinate support are hampered by miscommunications along hyperlanes. Citizens panic, governors argue, and the fragile cohesion that had been maintained through diplomacy begins to fray. Rena must navigate a web of human emotion, bureaucracy, and logistical complexity, learning that even the outer rim, distant from Trantor's decay, is vulnerable to the unforeseen. In the midst of these disruptions, a new variable emerges, one that no encyclopedist, merchant, or administrator can predict. The mule, a mutant anomaly with unprecedented emotional influence, begins to assert its presence on the periphery. Its subtle manipulations affect alliances, inflame tensions, and disrupt patterns of trade and loyalty. The Foundation, for all its preparation and foresight, confronts an adversary outside the realm of prediction, one capable of destabilizing centuries of careful planning. Jorvan, Solara, Talus, and Rena begin to perceive the early signs of this threat. It is invisible, yet pervasive, subtle, yet transformative. Anomalies once dismissed as minor now form a constellation of disruption pointing toward a greater crisis. The Seldon Plan, designed to shorten the Dark Age from 30 millennia to 1, faces its first true challenge beyond statistical expectation. And as the outer rim braces for impact, the human agents of the Foundation understand the gravity. The galaxy's future, dependent on knowledge, trade, and foresight, is under threat from a force that defies prediction. The first crises are imminent. Decisions made in the next weeks will reverberate for decades, influencing the survival of colonies, the stability of trade networks, and the trajectory of human civilization itself. The Foundation's rise, so carefully cultivated, is now at a crossroads. Every choice carries weight, every failure magnified by interconnectivity. And in the shadows of the outer rim, the first stirrings of the mule hint at a force capable of altering destiny itself. The human stories converge at the precipice of uncertainty. Jorvan prepares records, Solara navigates precarious trade routes, Talus adjusts experiments, and Rena negotiates crises, all unaware that these individual efforts are being tested by an anomaly that could outmatch intellect, commerce, and strategy. The galaxy waits in suspended tension. the outer rim alive with potential and peril. And then a single event signals the arrival of true chaos. A coordinated rebellion erupts on a distant but strategically vital planet. Communications fail, fleets are delayed, and the delicate balance of trade collapses momentarily. The Foundation's carefully constructed influence faces its first tangible, unstoppable disruption. The stakes are no longer theoretical. The outer rim, and by extension the future of human civilization, hangs in balance. The galaxy had, for millennia, obeyed patterns that psychohistory could predict. Civilizations rose and fell, empires expanded and collapsed, and human behavior, when observed in aggregate, revealed a rhythm, a cadence that Hari Seldon had charted with meticulous precision. Yet anomalies, rare and disruptive, always threatened these patterns. Among these, none was as extraordinary, as unpredictable, or as dangerous as the being who would come to be known only as the Mule. The Mule's emergence began quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the outer reaches of the galaxy. His origin was shrouded in obscurity, his abilities unknown even to those who observed him. Unlike rulers or generals who relied on armies, fleets, or bureaucracies, the Mule wielded power through an unprecedented control of emotion. His presence could sway loyalty, spark rebellion, or dissolve trust in ways that no calculation, no statistic, and no historical precedent could anticipate. The very laws of psychohistory, designed to predict mass human behavior, faltered at his touch. The first signs were subtle. A minor rebellion that should have been contained escalated inexplicably. Trade networks faltered despite careful oversight. Alliances that seemed solid disintegrated almost overnight. Observers at Terminus and other Foundation colonies noted inconsistencies that defied pattern. At first, scholars and merchants assumed human error, poor communication, or environmental factors. But as the anomalies multiplied, a chilling realization set in. A force existed outside the bounds of prediction, one capable of reshaping the trajectory of entire regions of the galaxy. The Mule's rise coincided with growing instability in the core. Trantor, already weakened by corruption, bureaucracy, and entropy, could not respond with decisiveness. Imperial fleets, once formidable, were scattered, mismanaged, and increasingly reactive. Governors and administrators struggled to coordinate, their actions delayed by miscommunication and internal politics. The Empire's power remained impressive in theory, but faltered in practice, leaving gaps that the Mule exploited with uncanny precision. By the time the core recognized the threat, the outer rim was already under his subtle influence. The Foundation, for its part, faced a dilemma of unprecedented scale. Seldon's plan had anticipated crises, calculated manageable inflection points that could be guided toward solutions. But the Mule was not an ordinary anomaly. He was a variable beyond statistical expectation. No amount of foresight, planning, or intellect could fully account for the consequences of his influence. Encyclopedists, merchants, and administrators could respond to predictable disruptions, but the Mule operated on a plane that challenged the very foundations of their assumptions. As the Mule's reach expanded, planets fell under his sway in ways that seemed almost magical. Military officers who had been loyal for decades defected without warning. Entire populations shifted allegiance after brief encounters with his emissaries. Even trade networks, the careful arteries of the Foundation's influence, experienced disruptions not explainable by mismanagement alone. The anomaly was not simply a political threat, it was a challenge to the predictive science upon which the survival of civilization rested. In response, the Foundation attempted to adapt. Leaders convened, strategies were revised, and defensive measures deployed. Yet each action seemed to play into the Mule's hands. Conventional power, fleets, fortresses, bureaucracies, proved insufficient. The anomaly's control over emotion allowed him to circumvent conventional structures entirely, undermining authority and sowing discord without direct confrontation. It was a demonstration of power that had no historical precedent and no analog in Seldon's calculations. The philosophical stakes were immense. The mule forced humanity to confront the limits of foresight and prediction. Civilization had long relied on structure, intellect, and systems to guide mass behavior. Yet here was a force that could not be quantified, measured, or anticipated. The rise of an unpredictable, uncontainable individual challenged the assumptions underlying psychohistory and, by extension, the very notion of controlling the future. The galaxy faced a question that transcended strategy. Could even a carefully designed plan withstand the emergence of a force beyond comprehension? Even as this philosophical storm raged, human stories unfolded within it. Citizens, merchants, and scholars experienced small disruptions that hinted at larger forces at play. A trader on a fringe world noticed that shipments had been mysteriously redirected, eroding years of careful planning. A military officer found entire regiments swayed to a new allegiance without explanation. A scholar observed shifts in cultural norms among colonies, long aligned with the Foundation. Each incident seemed isolated, but when taken together, they revealed a pattern, a subtle, insidious influence that defied understanding. Meanwhile, the mule consolidated power through networks invisible to the core and the Foundation. He cultivated loyalty not with coercion, but with the manipulation of emotion, perception, and desire. Planets previously neutral or aligned with the Foundation now found themselves drawn to his influence almost unconsciously. Observers noted the pattern too late. The anomaly had achieved critical mass. The galaxy, long predictable in its rhythms, now faced a force capable of rewriting history. The tension was amplified by the mule's unpredictability. Unlike the Foundation's crises, which could be addressed through rational solutions, every encounter with his influence introduced uncertainty. Entire strategies were undermined before they could be implemented. Fleets arrived to find obedience had evaporated. Markets shifted under unseen pressure. The anomaly operated both subtly and decisively, a reminder that no amount of preparation could entirely remove the element of surprise from human affairs. Even the core, with its centralized bureaucracy, began to sense tremors of the mule's power. Governors reported strange defections, fleets moved inexplicably, and communications networks faltered. Trantor, already strained under its own systemic decay, lacked the agility to respond. The Empire's greatest weapon, its control over the machinery of governance, was now ineffective against a force operating outside conventional channels. The anomaly exposed weaknesses in every layer of civilization, demonstrating that even the most powerful institutions are vulnerable to forces beyond prediction. And yet, in the midst of this upheaval, hope persisted. The Foundation, though challenged, remained a repository of knowledge, strategy, and adaptability. Its leaders understood that while the mule's influence was unprecedented, human ingenuity could still respond to crises with creativity, resilience, and courage. They could not predict every outcome, but they could act deliberately, observe patterns, and leverage the tools of intellect, commerce, and diplomacy in ways the anomaly could not fully anticipate. The first confrontations were approaching. Fringe worlds, previously loyal to the Foundation, were swayed. Trade routes were disrupted, fleets and armies faced defections, and somewhere in the outer rim, the mule's influence coalesced into a direct challenge, a test of both human ingenuity and the limits of psychohistory itself. The galaxy, vast and complex, waited in suspended tension. Every action, every misstep, every decision carried consequences that would reverberate across light years. The stakes could not have been higher. Civilization, painstakingly preserved through centuries of knowledge, trade, and strategy, faced an anomaly that defied prediction. The rise of the mule was not merely a political threat, it was a challenge to the very principles upon which the survival of humanity rested. Every observer, every scholar, every administrator knew that the coming confrontation would determine the fate of the outer rim, the foundation, and potentially the galaxy itself. And in the shadows, beyond fleets, archives, and markets, the mule prepared. The anomaly that Seldon's psychohistory could not predict was ready to test the limits of human foresight, to challenge the carefully constructed plan, and to reshape the destiny of civilizations. The outer rim has a sound all its own. It is a quiet vibration beneath the stars, a hum of space travel, commerce, and whispered politics. On Terminus, markets murmur with the shuffle of boots and the clatter of cargo crates, yet there is a tension in the air, an almost imperceptible pulse that raises hairs on the back of the neck. Traders pause mid-step, noting the sudden absence of a familiar ship on the hyperlane schedule. Scholars glance at records twice, spotting inconsistencies too subtle to quantify, too small to raise alarms, yet impossible to ignore. Something is stirring, something that bends expectation without leaving a trace. The mule's influence is like a shadow across senses. It cannot be seen, yet its presence is felt in the nervous hesitation of emissaries, the sudden shifts in trade patterns, the subtle tremor in a governor's voice during negotiations. A trader adjusting prices notices an unaccountable fear in clients who previously were confident, while a clerk misfiles documents without conscious thought. Even in laboratories, experiments that had run flawlessly for months show minor anomalies, unexplained variations that hint at an unseen hand. The anomaly operates not through force, but through perception, emotion, and subtle manipulation, turning the galaxy's own human instincts into instruments of change. Philosophically, the mule challenges one of civilization's most fundamental assumptions, that patterns can predict behavior, that foresight ensures survival. Psychohistory relies on mass tendencies, on the idea that while individual choices are unpredictable, aggregate behavior follows discernible rules. Yet the mule demonstrates that a single agent, armed with a power over emotion, can bend these aggregates, creating ripples that echo across centuries and light years. It is a stark reminder that even the most meticulously constructed plans are contingent upon assumptions, and that anomalies, however rare, can redefine the limits of possibility. The sensory texture of these disruptions is subtle, almost imperceptible. A transport vessel deviates slightly from its plotted course. A shipment of fuel arrives later than expected. A fleet commander hesitates at a critical decision point. Individually, these moments are trivial, lost in the noise of galactic bureaucracy. Collectively, however, they signal the erosion of certainty, the first tremors of a new order in which predictability no longer reigns. Citizens, unaware of the larger forces at play, respond instinctively. Panic, hesitation, fear, and in doing so, amplify the anomaly's influence. In modern terms, it is analogous to the power of information in today's global networks, a subtle shift in perception. Through social media, misinformation or psychological influence can alter markets, sway elections, or destabilize regions. The mule, operating on a galactic scale, functions similarly. He manipulates perception and emotion, using subtle influence to create outcomes that no centralized authority can fully anticipate or control. The lesson is clear. Systems, no matter how robust, are vulnerable to forces that act on the human psyche itself. The outer rim feels the ripple effects in every sector. Markets thrash with uncertainty. Diplomatic negotiations falter as negotiators hesitate or misinterpret signals. Fleets arrive late or in the wrong formation. Observers describe a strange tension in the air, a collective unease that cannot be measured in kilobytes or starship logs. Every human sense, sight, sound, instinct, is engaged in detecting the invisible hand that guides events, yet it remains elusive, intangible, and terrifyingly precise. Even the environments of daily life carry the marks of anomaly. The scent of ozone from hyperlane engines mingles with the acrid smell of malfunctioning equipment. Footsteps echo more sharply in corridors where once they were absorbed by activity, signaling hesitation, a collective pause. Shadows stretch oddly across public squares. Markets move with nervous energy. These are the micro-expressions of a civilization sensing a shift it cannot fully perceive. The mule's influence is not dramatic. It is insidious, infiltrating perception, trust, and instinct. Philosophically, the mule's presence forces a confrontation with the limits of human understanding. The foundation, built on centuries of accumulated knowledge, trade networks, and disciplined governance, finds itself tested not by brute force, but by the most intangible of adversaries, influence over thought and emotion. Civilization discovers that intellect alone cannot predict every outcome, that power is never absolute, and that even the most carefully engineered systems contain vulnerabilities invisible to calculation. Yet there is also a beauty in this tension, a reminder that human civilization is dynamic, resilient, and capable of adaptation. Just as Terminus thrives through the marriage of knowledge and commerce, so too must it now evolve to meet a challenge that cannot be measured or quantified. The sensory world, the clatter of markets, the hum of engines, the rustle of scholarly pages, becomes the proving ground for human adaptability, the theater in which intellect confronts anomaly. In practical terms, this means heightened vigilance, decentralized problem-solving, and rapid response. Observers must read not only data but human behavior, sensing shifts in emotion, intention, and trust.
Ships are rerouted, negotiations recalibrated, experiments repeated with extra scrutiny. Every sense becomes a tool of awareness. Eyes watch for hesitation, ears detect tone, intuition gauges reaction. The mule's threat is not only external, it is cognitive, affecting perception and decision-making at every level. And yet, even as the outer rim braces, the core remains largely oblivious. Trantor continues its slow decay, bureaucracy grinding on autopilot, administrators struggling with internal conflicts, fleets scattered across sectors. From the core's perspective, the galaxy's rhythm remains normal, orderly, predictable. But the mule's influence is already reshaping patterns in ways that Seldon could not anticipate, turning predictable systems into instruments of chaos. The gulf between perception and reality widens, and the foundation must act quickly to maintain cohesion. The sensory tension reaches a crescendo in the human psyche. Anxiety is palpable, hesitation becomes contagious. Trust, the glue of civilizations, falters. Yet the very unpredictability that threatens stability also creates opportunity. Observers capable of insight, adaptation, and decisive action can leverage these anomalies to reinforce their own influence, shaping the trajectory of the galaxy even amid chaos. The mule, for all his power, cannot fully anticipate human creativity, courage, and resilience, qualities that, in combination with knowledge and trade, might still turn the tide. As these forces converge, the stage is set for the first direct confrontations. Worlds previously loyal to the Foundation show cracks in allegiance. Trade routes are strained under pressure. Fleets hesitate at critical junctions. And in the shadows, the mule's subtle influence orchestrates the emergence of crises that will test the very limits of the plan. Every sound, every hesitation, every flicker of perception carries weight. The galaxy's fate hinges on awareness, intuition, and timely action. The outer rim stands at the edge of uncertainty. Civilization's senses are alert, its intellect engaged, yet the anomaly that defies calculation looms. The interplay of human perception, emotion, and influence becomes the battlefield upon which the future will be decided. Every sensory detail, from the echo of a ship's engines to the nervous glance of a negotiator, signals the tension of impending upheaval. And in this heightened awareness, the Foundation begins to glimpse the magnitude of the challenge ahead, a force outside prediction, reshaping the galaxy one mind at a time. On the remote world of Ascone, a young fleet commander named Relin feels the first tremors of the mule's influence. His orders, once carried out with precision, begin to falter. Officers who had been loyal for decades hesitate, mutter doubts, and occasionally defy instructions without overt rebellion. Raylan senses something uncanny, something intangible guiding the behavior of his subordinates, yet he cannot name it. He recalls the teachings of psychohistory, the predictable patterns of mass human behavior, and realizes with a growing dread that those patterns are breaking before his eyes. Meanwhile, on a distant trading hub, merchant Alira navigates a sudden collapse in supply chains. Shipments that should have arrived weeks ago are delayed or vanish entirely. Traders and clients act irrationally, swayed by whispers of fear and rumors. Elira tries to stabilize the markets with offers and reassurances, but the usual levers of influence, contracts, alliances, and credit, fail to hold. She feels the subtle manipulation of trust itself, a force that shifts perception and decision-making in unpredictable ways. The mule's reach, though unseen, twists human behavior like a shadow across light. In the libraries of Terminus, Jorvin discovers inconsistencies in the historical data he is archiving. Records show anomalies, social unrest in colonies that should have remained loyal, trade networks breaking in patterns inconsistent with human tendencies, fleets arriving late or not at all. As he analyzes the data, an unsettling realization dawns. A variable exists beyond calculation, beyond prediction. The principles he has devoted his life to, the meticulous, systematic preservation of human knowledge, face an unknown factor that could unravel centuries of careful planning. At the administrative core of Terminus, Rena confronts a political dilemma. Two neighboring systems, previously aligned with the Foundation, now question their allegiance. Governors exhibit uncharacteristic indecision, citizens display sudden fear, and negotiations collapse despite meticulous planning. Rena senses the hand of an unseen force shaping events, bending emotion and perception in ways that defy reason. She begins to understand that the Foundation is facing an opponent unlike any before, one who does not rely on armies, fleets, or bureaucracies, but on the manipulation of the human heart. Even within Terminus itself, subtle changes ripple through society. Markets hum with nervous energy. Laboratories report experiments failing unexpectedly. Academicians pause mid-task, their concentration disrupted by unaccountable tension. The city, a repository of knowledge and order, feels the intrusion of chaos. The mule's influence acts like a silent tide, invisible but unstoppable, shifting the currents of human action in directions no one anticipated. The human element is at the forefront of survival. In a remote colony, a young engineer named Talon races to repair a hyperlane navigational array disrupted by anomalies in communication. He works through exhaustion, sweat stinging his eyes, every movement precise. But even his skill cannot fully compensate for the subtle manipulations of loyalty and perception that have begun to spread among his colleagues. Talon realizes with mounting horror that technical expertise alone cannot counter the unseen hand-shaping events. Human emotion, unpredictably influenced, is as potent a force as any fleet or weapon. In another sector, the mule's influence transforms an ordinary rebellion into a coordinated, effective campaign. Colonists who would have quarreled among themselves instead unite, their anger harnessed by an invisible presence guiding decision-making and timing. Fleet commanders hesitate, supply lines falter, and the Foundation's attempts to intervene are met with resistance that seems instinctive, preordained. It is not mere luck or coincidence. It is the orchestration of a force that defies all expectation,
a variable that psychohistory cannot account for. Jorvan, Elira, Talon, and Rena each act in their spheres to mitigate damage. They communicate, strategize, and adapt. Yet every effort, every solution feels provisional, subject to the unseen influence of a being capable of bending human will. The tension is visceral, in the corridors of command, in marketplaces, in laboratories, in fleets. The subtle weight of the mule's presence is felt in nervous glances, hesitant actions, and instinctive decisions that no logic can explain. The galaxy itself seems to pause, waiting for the unfolding of events beyond prediction. The philosophical stakes intensify. Civilization, carefully preserved by centuries of intellect, trade, and foresight, is tested by a force beyond comprehension. The mule illustrates the fragility of planning, the limits of knowledge, and the enduring unpredictability of human behavior. Every choice becomes simultaneously crucial and uncertain. Every action is weighed not just against known variables, but against the invisible currents of influence that shift perception and loyalty across thousands of worlds. And then, the first direct confrontation occurs. A critical star system, strategically vital to the Foundation's supply routes, openly defies its obligations. Fleets dispatched to secure compliance arrive to find the population aligned with an unseen authority. Key governors and officers defect, carrying with them the secrets of trade, navigation, and strategy. The anomaly, once subtle, manifests in undeniable, tangible results. The Foundation's influence, so painstakingly constructed, has been breached. In the administration halls of Terminus, alarm spreads. Data streams show cascading failures, communication breakdowns, shipment misalignments, fleet defections. Even the most disciplined encyclopedists, merchants, and administrators cannot prevent the unfolding crisis. The mule, previously an abstract threat, has become a tangible force, capable of reshaping reality itself. The galaxy, vast and complex, is now at the mercy of a variable that cannot be measured or controlled. And as the sun sets over Terminus, the city pulses with apprehension. Markets quiet, academies dim their lights, fleets hover uncertainly in orbit. The human stories, Reland's hesitation, Elira's failed trades, Talon's fraying nerves, Rena's political maneuvering, converge into a single truth. The mule has arrived. He is no longer a distant anomaly, but an active agent, bending emotion, perception, and loyalty across the outer rim. Civilization stands at a precipice, its fate uncertain. The final moment arrives with a shiver of inevitability. Reports come simultaneously from multiple systems. Fleets have switched sides mid-engagement. Colonies have revolted without warning. Entire sectors of the outer rim have realigned under a new authority. The meticulous accumulation of knowledge, trade, and strategy that had defined the Foundation is now challenged on every front. The plan itself, designed to shorten the Dark Age from 30 millennia to 1,000 years, faces its first existential test. The human actors, scholars, traders, engineers, administrators, face the starkest question they have yet encountered. Can intellect, foresight, and human ingenuity survive against a force that manipulates the very emotions and perceptions that underpin civilization? The answer hangs in the balance, unknown and terrifying. The galaxy, vast and intricate, had long followed rhythms that Hari Seldon had calculated with remarkable precision. Civilization ebbed and flowed, empires rose and fell, trade routes expanded and contracted, and human behavior, in aggregate, was predictable. But the emergence of the mule shattered these patterns. What had been the smooth cadence of psychohistory was replaced by a jagged, unpredictable tension. The anomaly was not simply a disruptor. He was a force capable of rewriting centuries of expectation in a matter of months. The Foundation, built on intellect, trade, and disciplined observation, now confronted its first true existential threat. On every peripheral world, the mule's influence spread like an invisible contagion. Governors switched allegiance, fleets altered course mid-mission, and entire populations moved with a synchronicity that defied conventional explanation. Encyclopedists and strategists, trained to anticipate crises, recognized too late that this was a different kind of problem, one that could not be solved by calculation alone. It demanded understanding, adaptation, and a measure of intuition that even the most brilliant minds struggled to summon. Strategically, the challenge was immense. The mule did not rely on armies, fortresses, or fleets in conventional ways. He leveraged emotional manipulation, creating loyalty, fear, and obedience that were impossible to quantify. Commanders discovered entire regiments swayed without coercion. Governors observed citizenries, aligning with the anomaly as if compelled by instinct. Every structural advantage the Foundation possessed, ships, trade networks, fortified colonies, was rendered partially impotent because human behavior itself had been subtly redirected. The conflict unfolded simultaneously across thousands of worlds. Supply routes became unpredictable. Fleets that should have arrived at key junctions were delayed or diverted. Trade networks, painstakingly constructed over decades, faltered as merchant fleets either defected or vanished entirely. The Foundation's influence, the cumulative effect of centuries of planning, was tested not by force, but by perception, loyalty, and emotion. The very elements that psychohistory assumed would remain within predictable bounds. On Terminus, leadership councils convened in emergency sessions. Mayors, traders, and military advisors debated responses to the mule's rising power. Every decision was fraught with uncertainty. Should fleets be sent to reclaim loyalty? Should colonies be incentivized with resources? Should diplomats attempt persuasion, knowing that emotion could be manipulated? Every course of action had potential consequences, both visible and unseen, and no predictive model could provide certainty. Meanwhile, the core empire, already fractured by systemic decay, was powerless to intervene. Trantor's bureaucratic machinery ground slowly, incapable of responding to threats on the periphery. Imperial fleets, long symbols of might, found themselves obstructed by miscommunication, defection, and misaligned priorities. The mule's rise was not limited to the Foundation. His influence extended subtly into the decaying empire itself, turning strengths into liabilities and highlighting vulnerabilities that had long been ignored. Across the galaxy, the stakes could not have been higher. The Foundation's success or failure would determine whether the Dark Age predicted by Seldon could be shortened to 1,000 years, or whether humanity would fall into 30 millennia of chaos. And yet, despite the immensity of the challenge, the human element remained central. Scholars, traders, administrators, and citizens acted within their spheres, applying intellect, courage, and adaptability in ways the mule could not fully anticipate. The conflict was not merely one of fleets or colonies. It was a contest of human ingenuity against the unprecedented power of an anomaly. The mule's strategy was both subtle and devastatingly effective. He did not attack directly, but reshaped the motivations of those around him. Governors abandoned alliances without apparent cause. Fleet captains hesitated at critical junctures. Populations shifted allegiance as though compelled by instinct. Each event, while individually minor, accumulated into a cascading series of disruptions. By the time the Foundation's leadership could respond, the pattern had already spread, leaving the outer rim teetering on the edge of uncontrollable chaos. Philosophically, the confrontation illuminated the limits of prediction and the nature of power. Civilization is built on patterns, on knowledge applied with foresight, on the ability to anticipate and manage crises. The mule's existence exposed the fragility of these assumptions. Even the most sophisticated systems, designed to account for human behavior in the aggregate, could falter under the influence of an unpredictable variable.
The galaxy learned in real time that intellect alone could not contain every threat, that human behavior could be swayed by forces beyond comprehension, and that the fate of civilizations often rests on elements invisible to statistical models. Yet even as disruption spread, the Foundation responded with ingenuity. Leaders like Salvor Hardin and Hober Mallow, following in the tradition of the encyclopedists, applied both intellect and intuition. Fleets were rerouted dynamically, colonies incentivized through adaptive trade strategies, and alliances renegotiated with a careful blend of persuasion and leverage. Every action was informed by the recognition that the mule could not control human creativity, courage, and the capacity for improvisation. While the anomaly disrupted patterns, it could not fully suppress the adaptive strategies of those committed to survival and the Seldon Plan. Across isolated planets, human stories unfolded within the broader strategic sweep. A young fleet officer, observing hesitation among his troops, improvises a maneuver that stabilizes a key sector. A merchant negotiates a complex trade deal that prevents an entire colony from defecting. An administrator uncovers subtle patterns in data that predict the mule's next target, allowing the Foundation to preempt disruption. These individual acts, while small against the scale of the galaxy, collectively form a counterforce to the anomaly, demonstrating that human ingenuity remains a potent tool even under unprecedented pressure. The Outer Rim becomes a theater of simultaneous crises and improvisations. Fleets maneuver through hyperlanes under constant uncertainty. Trade convoys navigate disrupted routes. Intelligence officers piece together the pattern of the mule's influence. Each world, each sector, experiences a microcosm of the struggle between prediction and anomaly. Civilization, though shaken, continues to adapt, demonstrating that the Seldon Plan is resilient not because it anticipates every detail, but because it is built to leverage human ingenuity when the unexpected occurs. And yet, the mule is not idle. While the Foundation responds, he evolves, anticipating reactions, reshaping loyalties, and exploiting vulnerabilities. The galaxy witnesses a force capable of learning, adapting, and subtly manipulating events on a scale previously unimaginable. Every plan, every strategy, every action taken by the Foundation encounters resistance, not through brute force, but through the pliable substrate of human emotion and perception. The anomaly's power lies in its invisibility, its subtlety, and its ability to transform ordinary human behavior into instruments of disruption. The first major clash approaches. Strategic sectors are on the verge of open confrontation. Fleets hover uncertainly in orbit, and colonies teeter between loyalty and defection. The Foundation, though informed, cannot fully predict outcomes. Every human decision, every act of courage, every creative solution could tip the balance. And in the shadows, the mule's influence continues to weave through the galaxy, unseen but omnipresent, shaping events that will define the fate of civilization for centuries to come. The galaxy waits, suspended between foresight and anomaly. The Seldon Plan faces its ultimate test. Can a civilization built on knowledge, trade, and intellect withstand a force that defies prediction? Can human ingenuity counteract influence that manipulates loyalty, emotion, and perception on a galactic scale? The answer, still unknown, will determine not only the survival of the Foundation, but the course of humanity itself. The Outer Rim has changed. Ships hum differently through hyperlanes, engines vibrating with a tension that seems almost sentient. On distant trading worlds, the air smells faintly of ozone and fuel, mingling with the acrid scent of nervous citizens. Markets move in jerky rhythms. Traders hesitate mid-gesture, their decisions faltering as though unseen hands nudge them toward choices they would not consciously make. Even in the quiet halls of academic libraries, scrolls tremble beneath unsteady hands, and scholars pause mid-sentence, sensing subtle shifts in perception they cannot explain. The mule's influence is not a sound or a sight. It is a vibration that runs beneath the surface of reality, felt more than seen. The sensation is uncanny because it permeates every layer of civilization. In fleet command centers, officers report delays, miscommunications, and inexplicable defections. Signals arrive distorted, even when transmissions are flawless. A convoy reroutes itself not because of technical failure, but because the loyalty of those responsible has shifted. In colonies across the rim, governors experience sudden indecision. Populations sway without provocation, and traders alter supply chains on instinct rather than calculation.
The mule's touch is subtle, yet absolute. He manipulates the substrate of human behavior itself. Philosophically, the implications are profound. Civilization, built over centuries on the assumption that aggregate human behavior is predictable, confronts the limits of foresight. Psychohistory assumes that while individuals act unpredictably, masses follow patterns. The mule demonstrates the fragility of that principle. A single agent, wielding the power to manipulate perception and emotion, can bend human collectives in ways that defy logic, statistics, and calculation. The lesson is stark. Even the most robust systems of governance, knowledge, and trade are vulnerable to forces that act not on matter, but on mind. The sensory texture of this influence is everywhere. In a dimly lit marketplace, a merchant's eyes dart to a stall that was previously ignored. An unspoken sense of fear or urgency moves through the crowd, unaccountable yet undeniable. On starports, crew members hesitate in preparing ships for departure, instinctively aware that some imperceptible change has altered loyalty or priority. In academies, students pause mid-experiment, sensing that something intangible has shifted. These micro-expressions of unease ripple through society, subtle yet powerful, altering the trajectory of commerce, governance, and daily life. In modern terms, one could compare this to the impact of social influence and information networks today. Just as a viral narrative can sway millions of minds across the globe, the mule operates at a galactic scale, bending perception and choice without overt coercion. The difference is one of magnitude. What takes hours in a connected network can ripple across light years in days under his influence. The principle is identical, however. Control perception, manipulate belief, and the world follows. The galaxy becomes a living experiment in the power of influence, where emotion itself is a weapon. The Outer Rim's fleets reflect the subtle chaos. Ships maneuver with unusual hesitancy, captains pausing mid-course, crews uncertain of allegiance, communication networks flickering with inconsistent data. Even technical failures seem to follow patterns, aligning with shifts in loyalty rather than mechanical error. Observers record these phenomena with a mixture of awe and fear, sensing that what they witness is unprecedented, not warfare in the traditional sense, but a cognitive assault on the structures of civilization. Every starship, every convoy, every hyperlane is now a stage for invisible manipulation. The atmosphere in cities mirrors these disruptions. Footsteps echo differently in corridors, lights flicker with irregular rhythm, marketplaces vibrate with cautious, hesitant energy. Citizens, unaware of the larger forces at play, react instinctively to subtle cues, hesitation, tone, posture, fleeting glances, transmitting influence across communities. The mule's presence is everywhere yet nowhere. It is not measured by metrics or maps, but by the nervous tension that hums in the air, a kind of shared intuition of something fundamentally altered. Philosophically, this challenges the very foundation of human confidence. Civilization assumes that careful planning, knowledge accumulation, and disciplined governance confer control over destiny. The mule undermines that assumption by targeting not systems or structures, but the perception and emotion of those who operate within them. Even the most brilliant leaders, trained in strategy and prediction, discover the limits of calculation. The galaxy realizes that intellect alone cannot govern the flow of human behavior when influence itself becomes the instrument of power. Yet amid this tension, human creativity asserts itself. Observers, traders, commanders, and scholars notice the patterns, learn to read subtle signals, and adapt. Improvisation becomes as vital as planning. Fleets are rerouted in anticipation of shifts in loyalty. Trade routes are altered to circumvent emotionally swayed populations. Governors experiment with incentives to stabilize colonies. The mule can manipulate perception, but he cannot fully anticipate human adaptability, ingenuity, and the capacity for spontaneous, innovative response. Civilization, even under anomaly, demonstrates resilience. The contrast between perception and reality becomes a battlefield. On some worlds, citizens act irrationally, swayed by unseen influence. On others, individual ingenuity counters subtle manipulation, preserving alignment with the foundation. The interplay between instinctive sway and deliberate action creates a dynamic tension that defines this era. It is a war fought not with weapons or fleets alone, but with perception, emotion, and human intuition, the invisible currents shaping the fate of millions of worlds. Across the outer rim, the stakes are amplified by sensory immediacy. A fleet commander senses hesitation in a subordinate's voice over a comm link. A merchant feels a subtle shift in client expectations. An archivist notices anomalies in records that defy pattern. Each moment, while small, accumulates into decisive consequences. The mule's influence is both pervasive and precise, yet each human response carries the potential to counteract disruption. Civilization's survival depends on attentiveness, intuition, and rapid adaptive response. And so the galaxy teeters between chaos and order. The mule's presence is felt in every hesitation, every shift of allegiance, every subtle disruption. Human perception, sharpened to detect subtle cues, becomes both a tool and a battlefield. Civilization confronts the uncomfortable truth. Knowledge and planning, while powerful, are never absolute. Influence, perception, and emotion can alter the course of history in ways intellect alone cannot anticipate. The outer rim stands on the edge of an uncertain future. Fleets hover uncertainly in orbit. Colonies navigate shifts in loyalty, and scholars interpret anomalies in real time. Every human sense becomes a weapon, every perception a tool, and every instinct a potential source of survival or failure. The stage is set for confrontation, not merely between fleets or empires, but between the foundational principles of human civilization and a force that operates outside prediction itself. On the edge of the rim, Fleet Commander Rellan stands aboard the bridge of the Stellar Resolve, eyes fixed on the blinking coordinates of a nearby system. Orders that should have been clear are now riddled with hesitation. Subordinates who once acted with unwavering discipline now murmur doubts, their eyes flicking nervously to one another. Raylan feels a gnawing uncertainty he cannot explain, a subtle shift in perception that guides actions as much as any command protocol. His instincts scream anomaly, yet nothing tangible appears. It is the first taste of the mule's influence, invisible, irresistible, and devastatingly precise. In a bustling trade port on the planet Karsus, merchant Alyra faces a crisis that has no precedent. Contracts executed flawlessly for decades are suddenly questioned, shipments diverted without reason, and entire client networks crumble as fear and instinct override rational calculation. She watches as trusted associates, people whose loyalty had never wavered, hesitate, falter, and sometimes defect entirely. The mule's presence, though unseen, bends the very fabric of human decision-making. Elira adjusts pricing, shifts cargoes, and rewrites schedules in desperation, knowing that her intellect alone may not counteract the invisible manipulator shaping events around her. On Terminus, archivist Jorvan pores over records and notices anomalies he cannot rationalize, colonies that should remain loyal display patterns inconsistent with psychohistory. Fleets report conflicting reports of obedience and defection. Each inconsistency, while individually minor, accumulates into a cascade of disruption. Jorvan feels an unsettling tension in the air, the collective unease of civilizations nudged by an unseen force. It is as if the universe itself is bending toward a reality that no algorithm can predict, that no historical precedent can guide. In the administrative halls, Rena faces a political dilemma of unprecedented scale. Neighboring systems, once predictable allies, now resist negotiation. Governors who had followed directives without question hesitate, shift loyalties, or openly defy orders. Citizens act instinctively, swayed by subtle cues that defy rational explanation. Rena recognizes that the Foundation's greatest asset, the predictability of human mass behavior, is no longer reliable. The mule, unseen yet omnipresent, is testing not just colonies, fleets, and trade, but the very assumptions on which civilization depends. Even in ordinary homes, the mule's influence manifests. Families hesitate in decisions that once seemed trivial: to trade, to relocate, to voice opinion. Workers pause mid-task, instinctively uncertain. Markets quiver under subtle shifts in behavior. Children mimic the anxiety of their parents, spreading emotional contagion across communities. It is an invisible war, fought not with weapons, but with perception, instinct, and the manipulation of loyalty and trust. Civilization itself trembles under a force that cannot be calculated, only observed and reacted to. Talon, a young engineer, races across a hyperlane station to repair a failing navigational array. Every system misalignment, every delayed adjustment is magnified by the subtle hesitation of his colleagues, whose judgment has been nudged by unseen influence. Talon's hands shake, sweat stinging his eyes, as he realizes that technical skill alone cannot counteract the psychological currents now shaping the galaxy. He improvises, adapts, and recalibrates, knowing that failure means more than personal risk. It could tip the balance of entire systems toward the anomaly. Elsewhere, colonies erupt into seemingly spontaneous unrest. Citizens who once lived peacefully under the Foundation's guidance now unite in coordinated action, driven not by ideology or rational persuasion, but by instinctive alignment with the mule's unseen influence. Fleet officers, commanders, and governors attempt to intervene, yet every calculated move is undermined by subtle shifts in loyalty. What was predictable, manageable, and previously controllable becomes chaotic, exhilarating, and terrifying. In the archives of Terminus, Jorvan realizes the staggering truth. The Seldon plan, with its centuries of foresight and careful calculation, is encountering a variable outside prediction. Psychohistory cannot account for the mule. Knowledge, trade, and disciplined strategy are insufficient alone to counter this anomaly. The human stories, Raylan's hesitation, Aelira's collapsing networks, Talon's frantic repairs, Rena's political gambits, coalesce into a single reality. Civilization itself is facing its first truly existential test under the shadow of an unpredictable force. Across the rim, fleets maneuver with uncertainty. Ships that should be obedient veer off course, hesitate in engagement, or refuse orders entirely. Colonies change allegiance mid-discussion, trade convoys dissolve in chaos, and even local militias exhibit unexpected coordination. The mule's subtle manipulations accumulate into tactical advantage at a scale that no map, plan, or fleet disposition can fully anticipate. Civilization's response, though courageous, is piecemeal, improvisational, and fragile. Every individual, every choice, every instinct contributes to the struggle. Yet no one can see the full scope of the anomaly's power. On one planet, a council meeting dissolves into argument as governors and citizens struggle to align their decisions. Rilan's fleet hovers nearby, ready to intervene, but hesitation spreads through his ranks. Elira's trading network falters just enough to disrupt essential supplies. Talon's repairs, though successful, are insufficient to restore order across hyperlanes now subtly misaligned. The invisible hand of the mule weaves through every interaction, bending behavior, altering perception, and amplifying the smallest human hesitation into planetary-scale consequence. The philosophical stakes have never been higher. Civilization, painstakingly preserved through knowledge, trade, and foresight, now confronts the reality that one unpredictable agent can reshape the course of history. Every decision, every hesitation, every act of ingenuity is magnified under the weight of unseen influence. The galaxy trembles, not from explosions or battles, but from the subtler, more terrifying force of manipulated human perception. The mule's invisible hand guiding the course of events. And then, the final reports arrive simultaneously. Key systems have openly defected. Fleets are aligned against the Foundation mid-mission. Colonies once loyal now organize themselves in opposition. Supply lines have collapsed across multiple sectors. The anomaly has become undeniable, its influence visible in the cumulative failure of previously predictable systems. Civilization teeters on the edge, its structures strained to breaking, its people confronted with a power no intellect can fully contain. As the sun sets over Terminus, a chilling silence falls across the rim. Markets pause, academies dim lights, and fleets hover in tentative orbit. The human stories, the hesitation, ingenuity, fear, and courage converge into a single staggering realization: the mule has arrived. Not as rumor, not as theory, not as anomaly, but as an active, conscious force reshaping human behavior across light years. The galaxy waits, suspended between calculated plan and unpredictable influence, knowing that every action taken, every choice made, will reverberate in ways that may decide the survival of civilization itself. The cliffhanger is unmistakable. The Foundation's greatest test is no longer abstract. The Seldon Plan, designed to shorten the Dark Age from 30,000 to 1,000 years, faces a variable beyond prediction. Every fleet, every colony, every ledger and contract is now a battleground. Civilization stands at the precipice, its survival hanging in balance, and the galaxy braces for the next move of an adversary that cannot be contained, cannot be calculated, and cannot be predicted. The core is quiet, but not with peace. Trantor, the jewel of 12,000 years of civilization, hums with a tension no one dares name aloud. Corridors stretch endlessly, filled with administrators, clerks, and ministers performing tasks that, until now, defined the rhythm of the galaxy. But the rhythm has faltered. Communications flicker across sectors, fleets fail to arrive, and governors hesitate at critical moments. The city planet, vast as imagination itself, begins to feel like a tomb, a grave for certainty, a monument to the fragility of even the most enduring empires. High above the city, the sun catches the gleaming towers of Trantor, casting shadows that stretch like the fingers of history itself. The bureaucracy, immense and intricate, once believed indestructible, now creaks under its own weight. Decisions are delayed, reports misfiled, and priorities lost in endless committees. The mule's influence has reached the core, subtle yet undeniable, bending perception and human instinct, causing hesitation in leaders who had once been decisive. Civilization, for the first time in millennia, confronts the truth of its own vulnerability, that even the greatest concentration of intellect, wealth, and organization can crumble beneath the weight of unseen influence. Outside the capital, the galaxy flares into chaos. Fleets aligned with the Empire are misdirected, supply lines falter, and colonies once loyal to the Foundation shift their allegiance as if guided by instinctive necessity. Terminals crackle with reports of rebellion and defection. Merchant convoys vanish in hyperspace, their routes diverted by decisions no one can trace. The calculated elegance of trade, governance, and psychohistory itself seems undone by a single variable. The mule, unseen and yet omnipresent, reshapes reality by bending the behavior of minds, reminding the galaxy that prediction, while powerful, is never absolute. On Terminus, the Foundation responds with urgency. Salver Hardin's strategic mind, trained to anticipate crises, navigates the uncertainty with a combination of intellect, intuition, and improvisation. Military fleets are rerouted mid-course. Colonies are reinforced with both trade and diplomacy. Academicians interpret subtle anomalies to forecast the mule's next moves, but the anomaly adapts as well. Every prediction, every adjustment is countered by unseen influence, shifting loyalties, and instinctive defiance. The struggle is no longer one of brute force. It is a war fought across perception, intuition, and the pliable substrate of human behavior. Meanwhile, the core empire struggles under its own stagnation. Trantor, magnificent yet brittle, cannot respond effectively to the disruptions. Fleets meant to secure allegiance are delayed by indecision. Governors, distracted by subtle psychological nudges, fail to implement strategies that could maintain stability. Administrators continue their routines, unaware of the growing fracture beneath their feet. History's lesson becomes immediate. Concentration of power does not guarantee endurance. Even civilizations that endure for millennia are vulnerable when human perception itself becomes the battlefield. In the midst of this upheaval, human stories emerge with vivid intensity. Relan, commanding a fleet on the Outer Rim, navigates through defecting sectors, improvising maneuvers to stabilize collapsing systems. Elira negotiates complex trade deals to retain loyalty in critical colonies, countering fear with ingenuity and courage. Talon, repairing hyperlane navigation arrays, works tirelessly, knowing that even a single misalignment could tip the scales. Rena, orchestrating political interventions across the Rim, balances diplomacy, persuasion, and subtle enforcement. Each individual act is magnified by circumstance, demonstrating the essential role of human adaptability in an era when prediction falters. The sensory reality of the collapse is unmistakable. Trantor's corridors echo with uncertainty. The hum of engines vibrates with tension, and the faint scent of ozone and burnt circuitry permeates starports struggling to coordinate fleets. Markets flicker with hesitation. Academies dim their lights as scholars wrestle with anomalies in their data. Citizens move instinctively, swayed by imperceptible cues, creating an urban symphony of fear, uncertainty, and reluctant courage. Civilization, in all its complexity, feels the friction of its own fragility. Philosophically, the crisis illuminates the tension between destiny and free will. The Seldon Plan, designed to compress 30,000 years of darkness into a single millennium, faces its most profound test. The mule represents the unpredictable variable, the agent capable of bending behavior beyond statistical expectation. Civilization discovers that foresight, knowledge, and intellect are potent yet limited tools. Adaptation, courage, and ingenuity emerge as the essential counterbalance to forces that defy calculation. In this crucible, humanity confronts both its limitations and its potential. The confrontation reaches its zenith as fleets clash, colonies revolt, and trade networks teeter on collapse. The mule's influence, subtle yet pervasive, orchestrates events with an almost surgical precision. Actions that should have been decisive are thwarted by hesitation. Alliances
crumble under instinctive defection. Fleets misalign, creating vulnerability where once there was security. And yet, the Foundation, relying on decentralized ingenuity, adaptive strategy, and the courage of individuals, counters disruption at multiple points, stabilizing critical sectors even amid the chaos. In one pivotal moment, a critical star system, long considered loyal to the Foundation, pivots under the mule's subtle guidance. Supply lines falter, fleets hesitate, and communication networks flicker with instability. Yet human intervention, quick thinking, improvisation, and the resolute courage of key figures prevents complete collapse. The galaxy witnesses a delicate balance, the mule's unseen hand bending events, while human ingenuity and collective effort strive to resist, creating a dynamic tension that defines this era. The core burns with bureaucratic inertia even as the rim erupts with uncertainty. Trantor, shining with 1,000 lights, feels hollow at its heart. Decisions are made too slowly, hesitations multiply, and fleets poised for action stand immobilized. The contrast between the immensity of human achievement and the fragility of perception becomes stark. Civilization's structures, magnificent yet brittle, strain against the weight of unseen influence. The lesson is unavoidable. Even empires that endure millennia are mortal, and the true battlefield may be the mind itself. Across the rim, human stories crystallize into defining moments. Relan executes a maneuver that saves a colony from defecting. Elira preserves a critical trade alliance. Talon recalibrates hyperlane navigation just in time to prevent fleet disaster, and Rena brokers loyalty with courage and precision. Each story highlights the power of individual action in a crisis that defies prediction. Civilization's survival is not guaranteed by plans or systems alone. It relies on the resilience, creativity, and adaptability of the humans who inhabit it. And then, as the sun sets over countless worlds, the final revelation of the crisis becomes apparent. The mule's influence is neither total nor entirely predictable. Human ingenuity, courage, and adaptability create pockets of resistance that disrupt his plans. Yet the Seldon plan itself remains at a knife's edge. Fleets, colonies, and trade networks teeter between collapse and stability. The galaxy, vast and intricate, balances precariously between chaos and order. Every human action matters. Every decision carries monumental weight, and the outcome remains uncertain. In the closing moments, the philosophical reflection crystallizes. Civilization, no matter how vast, complex, or enduring, is vulnerable not only to external threats, but to the subtleties of human perception and emotion. Knowledge, foresight, and structure are powerful, yet never absolute. The battle between destiny and anomaly is not merely a story of fleets or empires. It is a confrontation with the limits of human control, the fragility of prediction, and the enduring need for courage, ingenuity, and resilience. The galaxy waits, suspended between collapse and survival. The Seldon plan, the culmination of centuries of intellect, trade, and foresight, faces its most profound test. The mule, unprecedented and unseen, operates with precision across the outer rim, bending loyalty, emotion, and perception. Civilization teeters, human ingenuity fights to preserve order, and the outcome, whether triumph, delay, or catastrophe, remains unknown. And as we reflect on this cosmic struggle, a thought reaches across time to our own world. If empires, built on intellect, trade, and foresight, can falter under forces beyond prediction, can we truly believe that our civilizations, so dependent on perception, information, and collective behavior, are immune to the same fate? The lesson is urgent, terrifying, and eternal. Vigilance, adaptability, and courage are as critical as knowledge itself. If every empire must fall, can even our own world escape the same fate?